Chapter 407. Yili raised an eyebrow. Such a coincidence. She had just returned yesterday and Mo Jingqi's people had arrived today. This was too much of a coincidence. Feng Xiao nodded and said, "It really is a coincidence, but this subordinate has investigated. It shouldn't be related to Wang Fei. The other just came out of Fei Hong Pass yesterday. However, it should be related to the person we caught yesterday." Tan Jiji. Yili frowned in thought. Tan Jiji's courage isn't small. He wants Mo Jingqi to save him. Isn't he afraid that if his identity is exposed, the first person to kill him will be Mo Jingqi? Feng Xiao smiled and said, "He probably didn't think that his identity would be known by us." This subordinate guesses that the reason why Mo Jingqi's people are involved is because he has made two preparations. After all, the Northwest is in our hands. No matter how careful he is, it is possible that he will fall into our hands. If we don't know that his other identity is related to Wang Fei, and just catch Tan Jiji, in the end, it is possible that he will be returned to Mo Jingqi. Yili nodded. Then that is to say, Mo Jingqi knows what Tan Jiji came to the Northwest to do. At least it is something that will benefit him. Feng Xiao raised an eyebrow and said with a smile, "Will Tan Jiji tell Mo Jingqi that the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu's mausoleum is in the Northwest? Mo Jingqi wants the treasures in the Emperor Mausoleum." It was said that the previous dynasty's Emperor Gaozu's mysterious Emperor Mausoleum was the most abundant and mysterious of all the Emperor's tombs. Even Feng Xiao didn't think that the Emperor Mausoleum that had been missing from the beginning would be in the Northwest. Yili stopped fanning herself. How will he explain how he knows the secret of the Emperor Mausoleum? Then we'll have to ask Tan Jiji. Feng Xiao said with a smile. Yili thought for a moment. "Tell Tan Jiji that I want the Biluo flower and the antidote to the poison in Prince's body. Also." Yili frowned and said, "Tell Qin Feng to interrogate Su Zuidi. She must know something important." It was just that Tan Jiji's identity was not enough for her to hold on for so long without confessing. More importantly, how did she and Tan Jiji get to know each other? This subordinate obeys. Then, were they sent by Mo Jingqi? Feng Xiao asked. Yili lowered her eyes and said faintly, "Leave it for now. We'll talk about it when Prince is free." Hearing this, Feng Xiao's mouth twitched as he looked at Mo Xiaoyao, who was sleeping peacefully on the chair. Prince was very free, okay? The workaholic prince was very bad, but the suddenly lazy prince was even worse. Thinking about how the study was already piled high with reports and files in just 2 days, Feng Xiao felt his vision darken. He could only hope that Prince's current situation would not last for too long. This subordinate will take his leave. In the governor's mansion's dungeon, Tan Jiji sat in a corner, expressionlessly looking at the dark dungeon. It had already been 3 days since he had been locked in this dungeon, but he had not seen Mo Xiaoyao or Yili. Only Feng Xiao would come to see him from time to time. His intentions were clear. He only wanted the whereabouts of the Biluo flower and the antidote to the poison in Mo Xiaoyao's body. Of course, Tan Jiji would not easily tell Feng Xiao. He did not believe that Mo Xiaoyao would let him go if he really told him. But at the same time, he also knew that the longer he stayed here, the more disadvantageous it would be for him. He had to leave here before that bitch Su Zuidi could not take it anymore and spilled everything, or kill her. Xu Manlin was locked in a room opposite Tan Jiji. Although it was only a few steps away, the two could only look at each other from afar. Xu Manlin, as the southern border's holy maiden, was also a noble woman who had not suffered much since she was young. When she first came in, she still had the strength to curse and scold, but after Feng Xiao starved her for 2 meals, she obediently stayed there. But from time to time, she would look at Tan Jiji and cry, which made Tan Jiji, who was already annoyed, even more annoyed. He simply did not bother with her. The two of them had nothing to say in the cell. Tan Jiji sat on the side, lost in thought and thinking of a plan. Xu Manlin sat opposite him, crying and complaining from time to time. The sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Tan Jiji's expression did not change, but his gaze quickly shot to the door. Under the crowd's escort, a pair of beautiful people walked in hand in hand. Tan Jiji's gaze first fell on Yili's body. She had changed out of her plain and simple clothes, and was wearing a lilac-colored watercloud satin embroidered with light-colored hibiscus flowers. In this hot summer, it showed a different kind of delicate and elegant. At the same time, it also made Tan Jiji secretly apprehensive of the Prince Ding mansion's hidden strength. Now, Mo Jingqi had already seized Mo Xiuyao's title of nobility on the grounds of Mo Xiuyao's treason. He had completely sealed off the entire northwest region and the Dechu state's economic exchanges. The Prince Ding mansion was in this remote northwest region, but they were still able to produce this year's newest water cloud satin, a specialty of the Nanzhao kingdom. It could be seen that they had huge financial resources and connections. It should be known that even in the imperial palace, there were only about 10 pieces of water cloud satin in a year. When the two countries started fighting last year, they were completely out of stock. Tan Jiji had never felt that Yili was very beautiful because he had seen too many stunning beauties. But at this time, he had to admit that Mo Xiuyao's eyes were very good. The beauty of the woman in front of him was not stunning, but it made people feel comfortable and at ease. There was also that calm and composed expression, and the hint of brightness and confidence hidden between the gentle brows. It suddenly made people feel that any beauty in the world was just mediocre in front of her. Humph! Mo Xiuyao gave a light snort. His gaze slowly swept across Tan Jiji, and a dangerous presence came from his body. Tan Jiji felt a chill in his heart. He hurriedly took away his gaze from Yili's body. He stood and smiled at the door as he said, "This official Tan Jiji greets the prince and Wang Fei." Mo Xiuyao raised an eyebrow and looked at him as he said, "Very good, your courage isn't bad." There were not many people that could still calmly come forward to bow at this time. Mo Xiuyao couldn't help but have a higher opinion of the man in front of him. But this still could not change his impending fate. Behind him, someone moved two cushioned chairs in front of the prison cell. Mo Xiuyao pulled Yili to sit down. Even in this dark and dirty prison cell, the two were still at ease as though there were hundreds of flowers blooming in front of them. Someone had sent tea as a gift, but the prison cell was clearly not a good place to drink tea. Mo Xiuyao frowned and took the teacup from Yili's hands and put it on the table to the side. Yili gave a faint smile and looked at Tan Jiji and Xu Manlin to ask, "Tan official, this consort and prince have been busy these past few days and have neglected the two of you. Please forgive us. Are the two of you well?" Tan Jiji grimaced and looked at Yili as he said, "Wang Fei is too polite. Tan Jiji is not as skilled as the other." Yili nodded and looked at him with a smile as she asked, "Then Tan official should know what Ben Fei wants." "What is Tan official's answer?" Tan Jiji smiled and said, "This one understands. Wang Fei wants the Bai Luo flower. Wang Fei must have spent a lot of effort in this past year. But this one advises Wang Fei not to waste time on that person surnamed Liang. He won't be able to find the Bai Luo flower." "Oh?" Yili's brows furrowed slightly. She raised a hand to rub her forehead and asked, "Why should I believe Tan official? Or, even if what Tan official says is true, so what?" Tan Jiji said, "The Bai Luo flower is a sacred item of Nanjiang. Does Wang Fei really believe that the Nanzhao royal family would give such a treasure to a wealthy merchant of Dechu state for safekeeping? Everyone says that merchants value profit. Has the Nanzhao royal family not considered the possibility that he would take the treasure for himself?" Yili sighed and looked helplessly at Tan Jiji as she said, "Tan official, since you dare to use the Bai Luo flower to protect your own life, Ben Fei does not doubt that you do not know the whereabouts of the Bai Luo flower. So, there is no need for you to say so much. But, you should know that before you find the item, anything you say is useless." Tan Jiji's eyes flashed as he stared at Yili and said, "What happens after you find the item? Is Wang Fei trying to convince this one that the Prince Ding mansion will keep its word?" Chapter 408. Feng Xiao, who was standing behind them, glanced at him and said with a smile, "Tan Darren, what can you do if you don't believe me?" Tan Jiji was silent. Indeed, It had fallen into the hands of the Prince Ding mansion. What could he do if he didn't believe it? If he believed it, he might have a way out. If he didn't believe it, he would die. Normally, Tan Jiji wouldn't mind taking this gamble. But now, he didn't dare to gamble because he didn't have time. Once something happened, not to mention telling Mo Xiaoyao the whereabouts of the blue sky flower, even if he personally brought the blue sky flower to Mo Xiaoyao, it would be difficult to escape. Thinking of this, Tan Jiji shook his head and said, "I'm sorry. Wang Fei should know that even if you know the whereabouts of the blue sky flower, it can't be obtained overnight. But I still have things to do. I really can't stay here for long. Presumably, His Majesty's envoy has already arrived in Ruyang." Tan Jiji was very confident in his previous arrangements. As long as Mo Xiaoyao hadn't openly said that he wanted to rebel against Chu, he still had to be wary of the envoy of the imperial court. "Tan Jiji. Lin Yuan, are you reminding I of your other identity?" Mo Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes and asked. Even if he didn't like Mo Jingqi, it didn't mean that he would let go of a remnant of the previous dynasty. After all, it wasn't only Emperor Taizu who destroyed the previous dynasty. The ancestors of the Prince Ding mansion also took most of the credit. So they were natural enemies. Tan Jiji smiled helplessly. He had to wonder how many chances he had to walk out of Ruyang alive. After thinking for a moment, Tan Jiji said, "Prince, whether it's Tan Jiji or Lin Yuan, at least we don't have a conflict of interest right now, right? Killing Tan Jiji won't do any good to the Northwest and the Prince Ding mansion's current situation. Also, Prince understands His Majesty. His Majesty will definitely make a big fuss about this and destroy the reputation of the Prince Ding mansion." Mo Xiaoyao sneered disdainfully. "Do you think I care about this?" Tan Jiji was indifferent. He really couldn't tell that Mo Xiaoyao cared about the reputation of the Ding King's palace. This was also the thing he couldn't figure out the most. As long as one wasn't a fool or a naturally fatuous ruler, anyone would know the importance of winning the hearts of the people. Even someone like Mo Jingqi, who clearly didn't care about the lives of the common people, was still very concerned about public opinion. But for the past half a year, no matter what Mo Jingqi said, the Northwest had not responded. It was as if they had tacitly agreed to all of Mo Jingqi's claims. Such a situation made Tan Jiji faintly uneasy. With this kind of reaction, if Mo Xiaoyao wasn't so dispirited that he was ready to give up, then he was ready to stir up chaos in the world. They would have to fight sooner or later anyway. Rather than trying to defend themselves now and making others think that they were hypocrites in the future, it would be better to not say anything from the beginning. Tan Jiji took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down. He lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, "Falling into the hands of the prince this time, this one has lost. Wang Fei has also been to the imperial mausoleum. The treasures inside can be considered this one's apology for offending Wang Fei. Adding on the whereabouts of the Bai Luo flower in exchange for this one's life. What does the prince think?" Mo Xiaoyao's expression was indifferent. It was clear that he wasn't interested in this at all. The imperial mausoleum was in the northwest. If Mo Xiaoyao was happy, he could send people to dig it up at any time. There really wasn't any need for Tan Jiji to give it as a gift. Tan Jiji hadn't expected to pass so easily. After thinking, he continued, "This one will also give you 100,000 taels of gold, as well as all of the secret bases in the northwest and Jing. Can this be considered sincere?" Yili looked at him with interest and said with a small smile, "Official Tan is really willing to pay." Tan Jiji smiled helplessly and said, "No matter what, nothing is more important than one's life. Without one's life, what use is there in keeping anything else? Princess consort, I don't think I have neglected you in the past few days. My previous rudeness can be considered as human nature. Is the price this one has paid not enough?" Yili nodded in agreement with his words. If he had only captured him to threaten the Mahist army, then this kind of price and compensation was not small. After all, he hadn't really succeeded in taking her away to threaten Mo Xiaoyao. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had tried to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. But for some reason, Yili felt that there was a secret on him that was even more important than his identity. Lowering her eyes to think, Yili asked, "Official Tan, how do you know about the poison in the prince's body and the cure?" Tan Jiji calmly met her eyes and said with a smile, "This one has studied the prince's case in the Imperial Hospital. And Wang Fei should know that father's medical skills are not as good as those so-called divine doctors. This one has seen and heard since childhood, so naturally I have some experience." Yili calmly stared at him for a long time. So long that Tan Jiji thought that he had made a mistake that he shouldn't have. Then he heard Yili change the topic and ask, "Official Tan, how do you know Su Zuidi?" As expected, it was this whore. Even though he had known the reason for his identity being exposed, but when Yili mentioned it, Tan Jiji still wanted to skin Su Zuidi alive. He had calculated everything and hid by Imo Jingqi's side for 10 years without revealing any flaws. He had secretly thought that he was flawless, but he hadn't thought that he would fall into the hands of this whore. Tan Jiji couldn't help but feel regret. He shouldn't have underestimated Imo Xiaoyao and Han Mingyue. If he wanted to kill that whore, there should have been a way to avoid the two of them. But he had been too careful and had instead caused a huge problem today. Even though he had already torn Su Zuidi to pieces in his heart, Tan Jiji's face didn't reveal any flaws. He looked at Imo Xiaoyao with a faint smile and said, "Miss Su was the #1 beauty in the Chu state. I'm not the only one who had a relationship with her. Even the world-famous young master Ming Yu also fell for Miss Su's pomegranate skirt. Young and frivolous. I've let Wang Fei see a joke." In the cell, everyone's expression became a little strange. Everyone present was a trusted aide of the Prince Ding mansion and naturally understood Su Zuidi's identity. Tan Jiji's words were blatantly telling Imo Xiaoyao that his former fiancée had made him a cuckold more than once. Imo Xiaoyao's expression was the same as usual. His handsome chin slightly raised as he looked at Tan Jiji and asked, "You want I to immediately kill Su Zuidi, right?" Tan Jiji's heart trembled as he secretly reminded himself that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. He smiled and said, "If it wasn't for her, the prince probably wouldn't know my identity right now, right? Who knew that a moment of carelessness in my early years would cause me to fall into such a situation? Naturally, I don't want Su Zuidi to live anymore." "What?" Imo Xiaoyao smiled indifferently and no longer paid attention to Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji secretly sighed in relief. He understood that his life and death was now in Yili's hands. But what Yili cared about the most was Imo Xiaoyao's life. "Young Master Tan, how will you make this consort believe that the whereabouts of the falling jade flower you provided is true?" Yili asked softly. Tan Jiji smiled proudly and said, "Because in this world, no one knows the true whereabouts of the falling jade flower except for me." Yili raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "If that's the case, then this consort can't believe you. After all, you're not willing to stay until this consort obtains the falling jade flower. Isn't this making things difficult for me? So, Lord Tan can leave, but Miss Shu must stay." Everyone's gaze fell on Shu Manlin, who was in the other cell. Shu Manlin didn't say anything because she knew that she couldn't be of any help. But she didn't expect that in the end, she would be dragged into this. She couldn't help but stand up and pounce on the bars of the cell. She angrily glared at Yili and said, "Yili, you're impudent. I'm the southern border's holy maiden, how dare you imprison me?" Chapter 409. Yili raised her eyebrows but didn't speak. Feng Xiao, who was behind her, smiled in surprise. "Nanzhang's holy maiden? This young master has never seen Nanzhang's holy maiden. This time, it's all thanks to Wang Fei. But, speaking of which, it seems that Nanzhang's holy maiden can't see outsiders, much less leave Nanzhao's capital. Wang Fei, this isn't a fake, right?" Yili said with a smile, "It's the real deal." Shu Manlin's face paled. She was deeply favored by the king of Nanzhao. However, as Nanzhang's holy maiden, she had secretly run to Dechu State and let people see her appearance. This was an unforgivable crime in the eyes of Nanzhao's people. If this spread, she wouldn't be able to retire in Nanzhang's holy land. It would be good enough if she wasn't burned to death by Nanzhao's people. This was Nanzhao's rule for hundreds of years. Even the king of Nanzhao couldn't save her. Moreover, she had a political enemy, Princess Anqi, who was eyeing her covetously. If this spread to Princess Anqi's ears, she definitely wouldn't be able to escape. Tan Jiji couldn't help but frown at Yi Li's conditions. After a long time, he said, Wang Fei is truly intelligent. This one has no choice but to admit defeat. His identity had been exposed. This meant that his 10 years of business in the Chu capital had been destroyed. At least, he definitely couldn't go back to Mo Jingqi's side. As a result, Nanzhao became his last bargaining chip. If he wanted to control Nanzhao, he could only rely on Xu Manlin. Yi Li obviously saw through this, which was why she proposed the condition of detaining Xu Manlin. If something happened to Xu Manlin, even if he escaped the northwest, as long as the Prince Ding mansion did something, he would be hunted down by both the Chu capital and Nanzhao. At that time, no matter how big the world was, there would be no place for him to hide. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled. Official Tan is overpraising me. Mo Xiaoyao stood and helped Yi Li up to leave. Yi Li smiled at Tan Jiji. Official Tan, you can think about it for one night. Tell me your answer tomorrow morning. Leave Xu Manlin behind. As long as this consort finds the Bai Luo flower, this matter will be written off. Tan Jiji smiled helplessly, do I have a choice? If he could do it all over again, Tan Jiji swore that he would never care whether Yi Li was Princess Ding or not. After leaving that damned imperial mausoleum, he would immediately leave the northwest. The Prince Ding mansion was never a place where Lin Luoran could rest assured. After Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao left, the people in the cell immediately left, leaving Tan Jiji and Xu Manlin to face each other in silence. After a long time, Xu Manlin asked in a trembling voice, Jiji, you really want to leave me here? Tan Jiji sighed softly and looked at Xu Manlin with eyes full of tenderness and pity. Lin, you can see that we have no choice now. If we don't agree with them, we'll both die here. Don't worry, as long as Yi Li gets the Bai Luo flower, she will naturally let you go. Xu Manlin looked at him hesitantly, are we really going to give them the Bai Luo flower? Tan Jiji said softly, no matter how precious the Bai Luo flower is, it's still a dead object. How can it be more important than you? As long as we're alive, we still have a chance. Don't you think so? How could Xu Manlin not know that they had no other choice? Even if she didn't agree to stay in the northwest, who would listen to her opinion? Although Tan Jiji was only saying sweet words, Xu Manlin still understood that Tan Jiji wouldn't abandon her. Since there was no other choice, she had to make Tan Jiji feel even more guilty towards her. She nodded with tears in her eyes and said, I understand. Jiji, I will stay in the northwest. You have to be careful. Tan Jiji looked at her with a gentle gaze and said softly, Lin, thank you. Jiji will not let you down. Xu Manlin nodded and said, we've known each other for so many years, I naturally believe you. Jiji, I'll wait for you. Although they were in this gloomy prison cell, the two of them looked at each other with eyes full of emotions and lingering feelings. It made the prison cell feel a little more warm, but what kind of thoughts and schemes were behind this touching and lingering feelings was not something that outsiders could know. After leaving the prison, Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li walked side by side. Yi Li hesitantly raised her head and asked, is it good to let Tan Jiji go like this? Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, what's so good about it? If Li is happy, let him go. If not, kill him. Yi Li helplessly glanced at him and said, killing someone isn't like cutting a radish, what's there to be happy about? Letting him go isn't a big deal. After all, the conditions he proposed are not bad, but I keep feeling that something is missing. Although the Prince Ding mansion had a large business, it was a foregone conclusion that they would break off relations with Mo Jingqi. The Prince Ding Mansion's business was not completely without losses. 100,000 gold taels was not a lot, but it was not a small amount either. Adding on the influence that Tan Jiji had in the northwest and the capital, if it was only for the matter of Tan Jiji trying to catch her, this transaction was clearly worth it. Mo Xiaoyao copied Yi Li's usual attitude and shrugged. To him, killing someone and cutting a radish were not that big of a difference. If he's released, then let him go. If he's not obedient, then just catch him again. Yi Li smiled and said, "Does the prince think that Tan Jiji is easy to catch?" This time, if Tan Jiji wasn't unlucky enough to be found out by Mo Xiaoyao in the northwest, it wouldn't be that easy to catch him. For him to be able to hide by Mo Jingqi's side for so long without attracting anyone's attention, it was enough to show this person's ability. Mo Xiaoyao was indifferent. "There's no one that I can't kill if I want to kill them. Even if they are fine now, there will be a day when they will die." Reaching out to hold Mo Xiaoyao's hand, the two of them strolled along the corridor. This time, Mo Xiaoyao had really changed a lot. Yi Li couldn't tell if this change was good or bad. In the past, Mo Xiaoyao was too deep. Even Yi Li sometimes couldn't completely see through him. Sometimes, Yi Li even felt that what she saw was what Mo Xiaoyao wanted her to see. But the current Mo Xiaoyao was more casual and fearless. Of course, there was also a strange stubbornness. For example, he didn't like Han Mingxi, so every time he saw Han Mingxi, he would release his killing intent without hesitation. Sometimes, Yi Li would even worry that Mo Xiaoyao would one day kill Han Mingxi behind her back. Yi Li had also talked to Mo Xiaoyao about this when he was in a good mood. At the time, Mo Xiaoyao looked at her seriously and said that if Yi Li was unhappy, he wouldn't kill him. Yi Li believed Mo Xiaoyao's promise, but she didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he turned around and released his killing intent towards Han Mingxi. Now, whenever Han Mingxi saw Mo Xiaoyao, he didn't provoke him and just walked around him. And now, since Mo Xiaoyao remembered that he wanted to kill Tan Jiji, Yi Li felt that even if Tan Jiji was released, he would have a headache in the future. "Prince, Wang Fei." Qin Feng appeared at the end of the corridor and bowed to the two. Yi Li nodded and asked with a smile, "Is there any news from Su Zuidi?" Qin Feng frowned in defeat and said with a green face, "This subordinate is useless. Su Zuidi isn't willing to say anything other than Tan Jiji's identity." Qin Feng felt that it was a mistake for him to underestimate Su Zuidi in the past. In all these years, he had never seen a woman who could endure torture so well. Especially when this woman was a delicate woman who would cry if she pricked her finger with a needle. Chapter 410. It's fine, it's expected. Take it slow, there's no need to rush. Be careful not to kill her. Yi Li said. If Su Zuidi was really as weak as she appeared, she wouldn't have the guts to seduce Han Mingyue and betray Mo Xiaoyao. Then she dumped Han Mingyue and hooked up with the Emperor of Xiling and Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling. For a woman from a prestigious family who had never left the Chu capital to have such schemes and methods, it was amazing. So if she had some other skills, Yi Li wouldn't be surprised at all. But Yi Li didn't want to kill her just like that. She could feel that for Su Zuidi to be so stubborn and unwilling to confess, it was definitely an earth-shattering secret. This subordinate obeys. Qin Feng lowered his head and accepted the order. Mo Xiaoyao looked down at Yi Li, who was deep in thought, and said softly, "Yi Li can't be too tired now, what's the point of thinking so much?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It's nothing, I just feel that there's something wrong with Su Zuidi." It was true that Su Zuidi was a woman who could endure, but she definitely wasn't a woman who was born to endure hardships, unless she said that the situation in the future would be worse than now. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows, thought for a moment and said to Qin Feng, "Secretly spread the news, say. I found Elder Su's granddaughter, Su Zuidi." Qin Feng was startled, looked at Mo Xiaoyao with some confusion and said, "Prince." Mo Xiaoyao played with the hair on Yi Li's shoulder and said carelessly, "There's no need to do too much, just let the people who should know. Understand?" Qin Feng understood. "This subordinate understands, I'll do it immediately." Early the next morning, Mo Xiaoyao and Yili didn't have to ask as Tan Jiji asked the guard in charge of the dungeon to bring a message. He completely agreed to all of Yili's conditions. As long as Yili could guarantee Shu Manlin's safety, he agreed to temporarily hold her hostage in Ruyang City until Yili found the Bai Luo flower. In response, Yili and Mo Xiaoyao were not surprised at all. Tan Jiji's life was on the line. No matter what he had to exchange for it, it was obvious that Tan Jiji had profited. After all, if he lost his life, those things would just be a pile of trash. Tan Jiji was not an indecisive person. He was also very forthright when he paid the bill. With his official seal, the Shadow Guard received 100,000 taels of gold from Tan Jiji's hidden forces in the northwest on the same day. At the same time, this also proved that Tan Jiji's hidden forces were shocking enough. Mo Xiaoyao's mood wasn't too bad during this time, so he didn't plan on going back on his word. Immediately, he ordered Tan Jiji to be released from the prison cell. Tan Jiji was in a hurry to leave the northwest, so he bluntly declined Feng Jiao's invitation to stay until the next day. He expressed that he would set off immediately. Yili also didn't keep him. There was only one last thing, the whereabouts of the Bai Luo flower. Tan Jiji looked at Yili, a trace of an evil smile on his face. Wang Fei, you've been looking for the Bai Luo flower from all over the world, but the real Bai Luo flower has always been right under your nose. Yili frowned and thought for a moment. The Bai Luo flower is in the Chu capital? Tan Jiji smiled proudly, saying, that's right, the Bai Luo flower is in the Chu capital. And it's in the Chu palace. It's in Mo Jingqi's hands. Why is it in Mo Jingqi's hands? Yili asked with a frown. It was impossible for Mo Jingqi not to know that the Bai Luo flower could cure Mo Xiaoyao's body. If he obtained it, wouldn't he destroy it? Tan Jiji seemed to see her worry and said with a smile, Wang Fei, don't worry. The Bai Luo flower is known to be able to revive the dead. Mo Jingqi cherishes his life so much, he definitely wouldn't destroy it. He would only carefully hide it in a place no one would think of. To be honest, ever since the Bai Luo flower was in his hands, even this one couldn't guess where he hid it. Yili coldly swept a glance at him and asked, you were the one who gave the Bai Luo flower to Mo Jingqi? Tan Jiji didn't deny it and said with a self-satisfied smile, Wang Fei, don't you think this is a good idea? In reality, I originally didn't want to give it to Mo Jingqi, but ever since I found out that Wang Fei and the sickly scholar of the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce were looking for it, I had no choice but to do this. With the Prince Ding Mansion and the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce's methods, they will find out sooner or later that the Bai Luo flower isn't in the hands of the surnamed Liang. Then, I might be in trouble. But who would think that such a treasure would be in the hands of the Dechu state's emperor? The thing that Prince Ding needs the most is in the hands of the person who hates him the most. Ha ha. You can leave. Since this consort agreed to your conditions, I won't go back on my word. However, you should pray that you won't fall into this consort's hands next time. Yili said lightly. Tan Jiji put away the deliberate smile on his face and swept a malicious glance at Yili, saying, this one will definitely remember Wang Fei's words. I definitely won't let myself fall into the hands of the Prince Ding Mansion again. Goodbye. Yili turned to leave. I won't see you out. After sending off Tan Jiji, Mo Xiaoyao immediately turned hostile and unceremoniously threw out the envoy sent by Mo Jingqi out of Ruyang City. As for the issue of them coming to ask for someone, all the men, women, and children in Ruyang City saw Tan Jiji leave the city gate. He was unwilling to return to Chujing and did not care about the Mo family army and Prince Ding's Fu. As for Tan Jiji's identity, Mo Xiaoyao didn't plan on telling Mo Jingqi, but he didn't deliberately hide it either. Whether or not Mo Jingqi had the ability to know was none of his business. In the room, Mo Xiaoyao, who had just finished washing up, looked at the white-haired man in the bronze mirror with disgust. His white hair was still damp. Then, his gaze fell on a small black porcelain bottle on the side. It was the hair dye solution that Shenyang had specially made for him. In the past, Mo Xiaoyao didn't think that he was a person who cared about his appearance, but now, every time he looked at his reflection in the mirror, he found it more and more unbearable. His head of snow-white hair and the hideous scar on the left side of his face made his originally pale face even more strange and terrifying. He didn't want Yi Li to see his frightening appearance. He wasn't afraid of scaring her, but he didn't want her to see his ugly appearance. His Yi Li was so perfect, but a trace of hatred flashed through his gloomy eyes. He was so broken and ugly. Only now did Mo Xiaoyao realize that it wasn't because he didn't care about his appearance in the past. It was because when he was 17 or 18 years old, he already had a unique appearance. He didn't need to be envious of anyone. But after 17 years old, there was no one who made him feel like he needed to care about his appearance. He could even imagine, if he stood next to Yi Li now, what a strange scene it would be. Paw! A palm slammed on the table in front of him. The red sandalwood table groaned in pain, and a few cracks quickly spread across the surface of the table. Xiaoyao! Yi Li's voice sounded from outside the door. And Mo Xiaoyao's body stiffened. If he didn't know who was outside, he was afraid that he would have sent that person flying with a slap. He only felt like hiding, but there was no place in the room suitable for a tall man like him to hide. Moreover, Yi Li obviously knew that he was in the room, so how could he really hide? Yi Li slowly walked in, turned around the screen and looked at the white-haired man sitting in front of the bronze mirror. As if she didn't notice Mo Xiaoyao's stiffening, she walked over and picked up a towel to gently wipe his hair. Why is your hair still wet? Although the weather is quite hot, be careful of a headache. Chapter 411. Li Li. Mo Xiaoyao turned around and stared blankly at the woman with a gentle smile in front of him. After coming back and recuperating for a few days, Yi Li's complexion was clearly much better. Although she was not as round as many women who were 7 or 8 months pregnant, she still looked very healthy and beautiful. As Yi Li wiped his hair, she asked softly, "What's wrong?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. "It's nothing." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It's good that you're fine. I'll help you fix your hair." The room was quiet as Yi Li gently dried his hair. Then, her fingers deftly tied up his snow-white hair. She took a silver ribbon from the box at the side and tied it properly. Only then did she look at it with satisfaction and nodded, "Very good." Mo Xiaoyao pulled Yi Li into his embrace and pressed his face against her round belly. He listened to the baby's vigorous movements in her belly, occasionally being kicked. "Li Li, if I become so ugly, won't you dislike me?" Yi Li stared blankly and couldn't help but smile. But seeing the person in front of her so carefully, her eyes couldn't help but ache and she almost cried. Gently stroking Mo Xiaoyao's silver hair, Yi Li asked softly, "If I become ugly, will you dislike me?" "Of course not. Li Li will always be the most beautiful," Mo Xiaoyao said solemnly. Yi Li smiled and said, "Then that's it. Besides, you've never been good-looking." How could Yi Li not have seen many good-looking men? There was Su Qingchen who was as refined as an immortal, the cultured and refined Mingyu Gongzi who was as bright as the moon in the sky, the extraordinarily handsome Han Mingxi who seemed unruly but was actually pure and sincere, and the famous handsome men in the capital, Feng Zhiao and Ling Haoyu. In comparison, no matter how outstanding Mo Xiaoyao's looks were, it couldn't change the fact that half of his face was disfigured. So, in Yi Li's eyes, Mo Xiaoyao really wasn't considered a pretty boy. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's stunned expression, Yi Li smiled and said, "But since you're aware that you're ugly, why don't you let Mr. Shen and Master take a look at the wound on your face?" Mo Xiaoyao hesitated. The injuries on his face were not untreatable. Instead, it was because Mo Xiaoyao, who had been seriously injured by the virus and was in pain every day, did not want to care about the scars on his face. Even his healthy body and legs were gone. What difference did it make if his face was ruined? Moreover, there were several times when Shenyang thought that he couldn't save Mo Xiaoyao. Naturally, he didn't have the energy to pester him to deal with the problem on his face. When Mo Xiaoyao's condition stabilized, Shenyang thought of this matter. However, he was rejected by the gloomy Mo Xiaoyao without hesitation. He reached out to touch the scars on his face. "It's already been so many years, Yi smiled and said, "What's the harm in trying? I heard that a certain person's face didn't have any scars at all. It healed naturally. It's really amazing. Since it's like this, why is Prince suddenly worried about his appearance today?" Being teased by Yi like this, Mo Xiaoyao actually felt a lot more relaxed. Hugging her waist and locking her in his embrace, Mo Xiaoyao sullenly said, "Even if Li dislikes me, it's too late. If anyone dares to fight with me, I'll cut them into pieces." Yi helplessly patted him and said, "You're becoming more and more like a child. Do you think I'm a gold ingot that everyone wants?" Mo Xiaoyao lightly snorted. His Li was much more precious than a gold ingot. However, she could only be his. Anyone who coveted his treasure would all die. "Master, how have you been these past few days?" Yi pulled Mo Xiaoyao into the small courtyard where Dr. Lin was temporarily staying. She looked at Dr. Lin, who was sitting under a big tree in the courtyard and drinking tea alone. Dr. Lin turned around to look at her. His gaze fell on Mo Xiaoyao, who was standing next to her with an unkind look in his eyes. Before, Dr. Lin had seen Mo Xiaoyao from afar. However, at that time, Mo Xiaoyao's hair was completely black. He didn't look as shocking as he did now. Looking at Yi, Dr. Lin nodded and said, "Sit." Yi didn't stand on ceremony. After thanking Dr. Lin, she pulled Mo Xiaoyao to sit down. She picked up the teacup on the table and poured a cup for herself and Mo Xiaoyao. She smiled and said, "There have been a lot of things these past few days. I haven't had the time to visit Master. I hope Master will forgive me." Dr. Lin lightly snorted. They hadn't formally taken in a disciple before. All he did was give Yi some pointers. Yi had always called him Master. In reality, the two of them didn't take it to heart. In the end, it was more of a safety issue. So Dr. Lin naturally didn't have any opinions about Yi. In fact, after the matter with Tan Jiji, Yi had already repaid his debt of saving her life. He was once poisoned by cold poison. Dr. Lin sized up Mo Xiaoyao. He frowned and asked, "Why is there cold and fire poison in his body now?" Cold poison and fire poison naturally couldn't coexist. Normally, it was possible to fight poison with poison. However, the two poisons in Mo Xiaoyao's body maintained a delicate balance. However, this didn't mean that Mo Xiaoyao was better off. In fact, the side effect of two poisons existing at the same time was that the body had to endure double the pain. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect the old man in front of him to have some ability. Although he didn't have a good impression of the old man, he still remembered that he had saved Li and the child in her belly. He didn't hide it and said indifferently, "I used phoenix tail grass before." Dr. Lin sized up Mo Xiaoyao for a long time. Finally, he said, "Prince Dinghua is indeed different from ordinary people. At the very least, your endurance is enough to look down on the world. I would like to see the doctor from before." With Dr. Lin's medical skills, it was impossible for him not to see that Mo Xiaoyao had some problems before. When a brilliant doctor met someone as brilliant as himself, he couldn't help but want to discuss and compare notes. Yi looked at Dr. Lin with some expectation. She asked, "Master, do you have any methods to cure the poison in Mo Xiaoyao's body?" Dr. Lin sneered and said, "If it was just cold poison, I could think of a way. But now, there's no need to think of anything. No matter which poison was detoxified first, the other poison would immediately take his life. These two poisons are also incompatible. At least until now, this old man hasn't thought of a way to make them compatible without damaging their medicinal properties." Yi originally didn't have much hope, so she wasn't disappointed. She only asked, "What if there's a blue falling flower?" "Blue falling flower?" Dr. Lin frowned. He put down his teacup and looked at Yi. After thinking for a moment, he said, "Blue falling flower. If there really is a blue falling flower, it's not a bad idea. I seem to have read in an ancient book that a pill made from blue falling flower can cure 100 poisons and revive the dead. Actually, it's more accurate to say that it can cure 100 poisons. It's completely different from the so-called antidote we're researching. It can be said that it's just relying on the blue falling flower's powerful medicinal properties to forcibly remove any poison in the body. It's just that the blue falling flower has been extinct for many years, so I haven't seriously researched the prescription. Yi Li was overjoyed. Although he hadn't obtained the blue falling flower, Shenyang had actually been researching the prescription for a long time. However, because it was an ancient prescription that had been lost, it took a lot of effort to research it. Sickly Scholar knew the prescription, but Yi Li couldn't be at ease taking something from him. Chapter 412. Dr. Lin looked at her and said, I don't remember exactly which book mentioned it. You can send someone to get it. Just don't disturb the villagers there. Yi Li nodded and said, Thank you, teacher. Dr. Lin coldly glanced at the two of them, then got up and walked into the room. Looking at his back, Mo Xiaoyao put down his teacup and said, Li Li, there's something wrong with him. N. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a smile. Mo Xiaoyao coldly said, You said that Tan Jiji is his adopted son, and he has feelings for Tan Jiji. But just now, he didn't even ask about Tan Jiji. Yi Li smiled and said, He lives in this Fu, how could he not know that Tan Jiji has already left? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head, but he shouldn't have no reaction at all. Regardless of whether it was worry, disappointment, or something else, this old man acted as if Tan Jiji was completely unrelated to him. It seemed deliberate. Lowering his head to look at Yi Li, Mo Xiaoyao softly said, I don't believe that Li Li didn't see through it. Yi Li picked up a strand of silver hair in front of his chest and softly said, So what if he's hiding something? Who doesn't have a secret? As long as he can help your body, I don't want to make things too difficult for him. After all, he is my savior. Yi Li was very grateful towards Dr. Lin. She knew that Dr. Lin must have some secrets in his heart. He was different from Tan Jiji. Tan Jiji cared too much about his so-called treasure and often arbitrarily suspected his adoptive father who raised him since he was a child. He neglected Dr. Lin himself. But Yi Li was watching from the side, carefully observing everyone around her. Not a single expression or look from Dr. Lin could escape her eyes. No matter what secrets Dr. Lin had, as long as he didn't hurt anyone she cared about, as long as he could help Xiaoyao's body, what else did it matter? Mo Xiaoyao watched as Yi Li played with the silver hair in front of her chest. Of course, he knew that Yi Li felt guilty about this. He gently pulled away Yi Li's hand and pulled out the strand of hair. He said dotingly, Since Miss Li said so, then we don't need to care about him. He would send someone to investigate Dr. Lin. As long as he didn't do anything he shouldn't do, he wouldn't do anything to him. When Dr. Lin came out of the house, he saw the two of them sitting under the tree and talking softly. The atmosphere around them was so warm and quiet that he couldn't bear to disturb them. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao were both strong cultivators. Before Dr. Lin even stepped out of the door, they had already heard his footsteps. Yi Li turned her head and looked at him. Dr. Lin threw a green porcelain bottle to her and said, There's nothing I can do about his hair. This is for you. He didn't say what the medicine was for. After saying this, Dr. Lin didn't send them off and directly went back to his room with his hands behind his back. They both knew that a person like Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't use medicine from a stranger. Naturally, it would need to be checked by a skilled doctor. Since it was like this, it didn't matter if he didn't tell them how to use the medicine. Yi Li took the porcelain bottle and opened it to smell it. She roughly understood the use of this bottle. When she was at Dr. Lin's house, she had seen many of his precious medicines. Putting away the medicine bottle, Yi Li stood up with Mo Xiaoyao's help and planned to see Shenyang again. Although she believed that Dr. Lin wouldn't do anything to the medicine bottle, she still needed to check it. Dr. Lin also said that he wanted to see Shenyang, so she needed to talk to Mr. Shen first. When she arrived at Shenyang's little courtyard, Feng Xiao and Zhou Yu were also there. Yi Li wasn't familiar with Zhou Yu. They had only met a few times. Although Yi Li had done Zhou Yu some favors, in the end, it was the Yi family's fault. So Yi Li hadn't taken it to heart. She didn't think that Zhou Yu would remember and send a letter for Duke Hua without caring about his own safety. Seeing the two come in, the three quickly stood and bowed, greetings to the prince and princess. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand, gesturing for the three of them to dispense with the formalities. He helped Yi Li sit down on the chair before turning to sit beside her and asked, "Feng San, what are you doing here at this time? Don't I give you enough work to do? And Zhou Yu, are you unwell?" With a glance, Mo Xiaoyao could see that Zhou Yu's complexion was slightly gray. He clearly wasn't well. Hearing Mo Xiaoyao's words, Feng Zhiao almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He stared with grief and anger at the man in front of him who had a leisurely and unashamed expression. Ever since Wang Fei had returned, the man who had spent his days and nights on official business had completely changed. He would never spend more than 4 hours on official business. After dinner, he would never enter the study. Every day, he would stay by Wang Fei's side and ask about her well-being. Not only did he not work hard, he also didn't allow Wang Fei to work. He said it was to take care of the future heir of the Prince Ding mansion, the future young master of the Mahist army. So, as a subordinate, what else could he say? But when a half-dead subordinate who worked so hard was facing his leisurely and idle master, and was questioned if he had too much free time, how could he endure it? Yi Li glared helplessly at Mo Xiaoyao. She looked with a smile at Zhou Yu and asked, "Is official Zhou unwell?" Zhou Yu stood and respectfully said, "This one is no longer working in court. Wang Fei can call me Zhou Yu. I just caught a cold, thank you for your concern, Prince Wang Fei." Feng Zhiao twisted his mouth and said, "What do you mean by caught a cold? This person is almost as hard-working as third brother. Tian only sleeps when it's almost midnight. When I went over, he had fainted. I say, Prince, are you in a good mood now? If you're not in a bad mood, why don't you arrange for the appointments of the officials in the northwest?" Exposed by Feng Zhiao, Zhou Yu lowered his head in embarrassment. Mo Xiaoyao leaned back in his chair and said lazily, "Appointments of officials? You didn't do anything." Feng Zhiao gritted his teeth. "Prince, I heard that this subordinate is just a minor deputy general." Mo Xiaoyao nodded in understanding and said, "You are reminding me to promote you? Mo Xiaoyao. You think this prince doesn't dare to beat you?" Feng Zhiao was finally enraged. His image as an elegant young master was completely gone. These past few months, he had carefully worked himself to death. It was fine if this young master didn't have the slightest bit of gratitude, but after Wang Fei came back, he became even worse. If they hadn't grown up together, this young master wouldn't have served such a difficult master. "You want to beat me?" Mo Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes dangerously. Feng Zhiao couldn't help but swallow and look at Yi Li on the side. It wasn't that he didn't dare to beat Mo Xiaoyao. When he was young, he didn't care about beating him up. The problem was, he couldn't beat him. Ever since Mo Xiaoyao finished his apprenticeship, every time he fought, he would be the one to be beaten. "Xiaoyao." Yi Li couldn't stand it anymore and called out in a soft voice. Mo Xiaoyao sat up and said seriously, "I know. The situation a few days ago was a bit chaotic, so I didn't have time to deal with these things. I will do well in the next 2 days. Zhou Yu, you've managed Ruyang City well. You can be the Ruyang governor for now. Later, choose a few capable people to help you." These past few months, the Mahist army had been very chaotic. Many empty positions had appeared in the northwest after the change of ownership. Even though the Mahist army was filled with elites, it wasn't the imperial court. There weren't that many civil officials waiting to be replaced. Therefore, many times, one person held multiple positions, and some generals even temporarily took over the civil duties. As for Su Qingze, who was both capable and trusted by Mo Xiaoyao, he was directly sent to Hangzhou to manage the affairs of the 3 provinces in the northwest. Because of this, Yi Li hadn't seen Su Qingze since she came back. Chapter 413. This official thanks the prince for his trust. Zhou Yu once again stood and expressed his thanks. Everyone understood what it meant for Prince Ding to personally appoint an official. According to the rules, the appointment and removal of officials had to be done by the imperial court. Now, Mo Xiaoyao's actions had vaguely indicated that the Northwest would gradually leave the imperial court. This caused many people to have mixed feelings. Some were happy, some were worried. Rest for 2 days first. Let your body recover, Yi Li urged. If your body collapsed, then don't think about anything else. Right now, the Northwest was lacking in talent. Looking at the attitudes of Feng Xiao and Mo Xiaoyao, Zhou Yu was clearly a capable person despite his young age. Zhou Yu nodded and said, Wang Fei, thank you for your advice. At the side, Shenyang looked discontentedly at the crowd and said, does everyone still remember that this is not a study for discussion? 3 out of 4 people were not healthy, yet they dared to discuss such nonsense in front of him, a doctor. Zhou Yu clearly just remembered that this was Shenyang's courtyard. He hurriedly suppressed the excitement and joy in his heart and said apologetically to Shenyang, this one has been rude. Mr. Shen, please forgive me. Shenyang waved his hand and took out a piece of paper, saying, go get the medicine yourself. If you don't want to fall on the bed and be unable to get up, then go ahead. Then without waiting for Zhou Yu's reaction, he turned to examine Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao and said, Prince, does Wang Fei feel unwell? Mo Xiaoyao shook his head and said, first take Yi Li's pulse. In the future, take a pulse every 3 days. Mr. Shen, I'll trouble you. Shenyang knew that Wang Fei's health was important right now and nodded unconcernedly. In his mind, he planned to postpone the closed-door research plan. At least wait until Wang Fei saw the child born. Taking Yi Li's pulse, Shenyang said, Wang Fei's health is good. While she has been weak in the past few months, she has recovered well and will not affect Wang Fei. The little Shitzi may be weak when he is born, but he can recover. After all, during the most important months of the baby's life, Wang Fei had been in a coma. In reality, Shenyang had to praise the doctor's medical skills for being able to keep the child. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. I'll have to trouble Mr. Shen in the future. Shenyang took back his hand and raised an eyebrow as he asked, in these few months, Wang Fei should have met a good doctor. Can this one take a look at the doctor's prescription? Yi Li didn't mind. She reported a few prescriptions that Dr. Lin had prescribed for him before. Shenyang didn't care about anything else. He quickly took notes and praised it repeatedly. Yi Li smiled and said, Dr. Lin is in this house right now. He also wants to advise Mr. Shen. If Mr. Chen has the time, you might as well visit Dr. Lin. The two of you can also exchange pointers. Shenyang was overjoyed. He clapped his hands and said with a smile, that's great. I will definitely visit tomorrow. Yi Li took out the porcelain bottle that Dr. Lin had given her and handed it over. She said, this was given by Dr. Lin just now. Mr. Shen, why don't you take a look at it and see what it is? Shenyang carefully took it. He lowered his head to smell it and thought for a moment. He took out some and rubbed it on his hand. After examining it for a moment, he smiled and said, this should be an elixir to remove old scars. There is a large amount of Lingxiang grass in it. It really is a rare item. Finishing, he looked at Mo Xiaoyao's masked face. He smiled and said, this isn't for Wang Fei. It should be for the prince, right? The prince can try it. Later, this one can modify the prescription to see if it can have a better effect. Shen, Yang. Mo Xiaoyao said with a dark face and gritted his teeth. For a man to care so much about his face made people feel uncomfortable. However, Mo Xiaoyao had to admit that he really did hope that this medicine would be effective. If he had to have a head full of white hair, then at least he should have a perfect face. Otherwise, wouldn't he be mocked by others? Shenyang did not care if Mo Xiaoyao was angry or not. He chuckled and returned the medicine bottle to Yi Li. In Shenyang's view, the present Mo Xiaoyao was better than before. When a person did not care about their own face and body, it meant that there was nothing in the world worth caring about. Now that Mo Xiaoyao was willing to care about his face, it at least meant that there was someone he cared about. As long as someone he cared about was alive, there was always hope. Without waiting for Mo Xiaoyao to explode, Shenyang waved his hand and chased them out. After leaving Shenyang's courtyard, Zhou Yu bid farewell and left the Fu. Before he left, he glanced at Mo Xiaoyao in surprise. He was still very young, so it was a bit of a shock to see the famous king of Ding being driven out mercilessly after being angered by a doctor to the point that his face turned green. Watching Zhou Yu leave, Yi Li asked, "Zhou Yu is too young. Is he good enough to be the Ruyang prefect?" Compared to the group of prefects in the northwest who had been pushed to the bottom by Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao, Zhou Yu, who had just turned 20, was too young. Feng Zhiyao nodded and said, "His abilities are enough, but his age is too young." "But, in Prince's view, there is no harm, right?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled coldly and said, "It's fine as long as his abilities are enough. Clean up those people who are just waiting to die. If anyone dares to have any dissatisfaction, let them come to I." Feng Zhiyao nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "With Prince, things will be much easier." However, Zhou Yu counts as one of Wang Fei's people. I'm afraid that when the time comes, those old men will come out and nag that Wang Fei is a girl. The trouble was that they couldn't kill all of those old men. After all, it was important to calm the people's hearts. These old men were all important people in the Northwest. It would be better to say something like a famous scholar, a loyal minister, a great philanthropist who paved the way, or something like that. There really was no way to move them. It wasn't as if Yi Li hadn't heard these words before. Back when she was leading the army, she had already heard the words of those stubborn old men. She smiled and said, "Since His Highness and Feng San both think that Zhou Yu is useful, then it shall be him. As for what those old men have to say, they don't need to find Prince. They can just find Ben Fei." Feng Zhiyao blinked and rubbed his forehead as he looked at the couple. Forget it. If he really allowed those old people to come and bother Wang Fei, Wang Ye would kill them. He had experienced the skills of those pedantic scholars. It was nothing now, but in the future. Feng Zhiyao felt that it would be a disaster. Late at night in the governor's manor. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. It was the time that night walkers liked the most. A black shadow flew up the walls of the governor's manor and silently landed in the flower bed next to the wall. Then, more black-clothed people snuck in from behind the walls and headed towards a certain place in the governor's manor. In a pavilion not far away, several pairs of eyes saw the black-clothed people through the half-open window. In the pavilion, Mo Xiaoyao sat lazily on a soft couch under the faint candlelight, looking down at the night sky. Beside him, Feng Zhiyao, Han Mingxi, Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, Mo Hua, and the others sat or stood, leisurely admiring the black-clothed people's actions. Han Mingyue leaned against the window. Her face was pale and tired, but her gaze did not move at all. She stared intently at the black-clothed people below. Feng Zhiyao fiddled with the exquisite desserts on the table beside him and asked in confusion, "Are these people really stupid or pretending to be stupid? Prince Ding's place was so easy for them to break in, but they didn't suspect anything. If Mo Jingqi or Lei Zhenting's place was so easy for them to break in, the first thing they would do would be to suspect something was amiss. They wouldn't go in so boldly." Qin Feng hugged his sword in front of him and snorted. "I'm afraid these people are just cannon fodder sent to test the waters. The other party must know how strict Prince Ding's manor's security is before they take action." Mo Hua nodded in agreement with Qin Feng's words. Based on the standard of an ordinary assassin, these people were too weak. Is it Tan Jiji? Chapter 414. Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, "We just left the Northwest and he can't wait?" Han Mingxi lowered his eyebrows and laughed, "That proves that he really can't wait to take Su Zuodi's life. It looks like Miss Su really is hiding some important secret. Qin Feng, can you do it or not? Su Zuodi has been in your hands for several months." Qin Feng's face couldn't help but darken at the mention of this matter. He glanced at Han Mingyue who was standing at the side with her back straight and complained, "This woman is really a bit difficult to deal with. After several months of torment, she's pretty much spilled everything except for Tan Jiji." Spilled everything? Han Mingxi sneered, making it clear that he didn't believe it. A group of people who claimed to be professional interrogators couldn't even deal with a useless woman after several months. How could they have the nerve to say that she spilled everything? Qin Feng glared at him angrily and said, "That's right, including how many men she's slept with." After saying this, Qin Feng felt that he had said something wrong. This Su Zuidi was once the prince's fiancée, but from the information obtained from the interrogation, she didn't seem to be the one who accepted the gift. Wouldn't this make the prince's face look bad? He carefully glanced at Imo Xiaoyao, but found that Imo Xiaoyao was leaning against the soft couch with his forehead propped up in a daze. There was even a faint smile on his face, and he didn't look angry. Qin Feng could only pray that perhaps the prince didn't hear what he said. Just as he was thinking, Imo Xiaoyao had already sat up, his long white hair casually draped over his body. Compared to his previous calm and indifference, there was a bit more coldness and alienation. Glancing at Qin Feng, Imo Xiaoyao said lightly, "Don't worry, don't kill her before you get the information out. Of course, if you have other channels to get the information, you don't have to report it to me and the princess." What he meant was that he only wanted Su Zuidi's secret. As for Su Zuidi's life and death, it was up to Qin Feng to decide. Qin Feng couldn't help but shrink his neck. Did Prince really hear what he said? He had to follow the princess consort for the next few days. No, he had to go on a long journey to settle some matters. As for Su Zuidi, Qin Feng glanced at Han Mingxi with some distress. He didn't care. Since Prince didn't care, even if he killed Su Zuidi, he could just find a way to capture Tan Jiji and interrogate him later. But, at least he had a good relationship with Han Mingxi, and Han Mingxi happened to be Han Mingyue's younger brother. So, Su Zuidi, that woman should be assassinated, right? Seeing the black-clothed man's figure disappear into the most remote courtyard of the administration office, Mo Hua waved his hand and signaled to the outside, indicating that it was time to reel in the net. Not long after, the lights in the courtyard lit up and the faint sound of weapons clashing could be heard. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said, "Tell them to hurry up. Don't let the princess consort rest." Prince Mo Hua said, "Don't worry, Prince, the sound won't reach the princess consort's courtyard." In order to not let the people in the main courtyard rest, the prison cells were specially placed in the most remote area of the administration office. Moreover, the shadow guards had a sense of propriety. Even they could only hear a faint sound from here, not to mention that the princess consort's courtyard was half a journey away. Sure enough, in less than a quarter of an hour, the lights in the distant courtyard were extinguished and the administration office returned to its original tranquility. Qin Feng frowned and said, "I'm afraid there will be a lot of assassins these days." This subordinate doesn't understand why Su Zuidi has to be moved back to the administration office. It would be better to put her in Qilin's residence, where no one would be disturbed. Zhua Jing said, "If we put her there, the assassins won't have to come. Because they wouldn't be able to find her." Feng Zhiao saw that there was nothing else, so he stood up and stretched his body. He yawned and said, "If there's nothing else, this subordinate will take his leave." Mo Xiaoyao casually nodded his head. Feng Zhiao took 2 steps outside and seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and said, "That's right, Your Highness, according to the pace, Su Qingze should be arriving tomorrow. I heard that there are 2 other young masters of the Su family with him." Mo Xiaoyao's face darkened and he glanced coldly at Feng Zhiao. He asked, "Why didn't I hear you say this before?" There was a gloating smile in Feng Zhiao's eyes. He shrugged his shoulders and said, This subordinate only received the news when I was having dinner. At that time, the prince was accompanying the princess consort for dinner. This subordinate didn't dare to disturb them." Mo Xiaoyao huffed softly and said, "Go make the arrangements. There's no place to stay in the Fu. Go to the city and find a residence for them to stay in." Feng Zhiao shook his head. "Prince, I'm afraid that won't do. Second young Master Su's residence is still empty. If the princess consort asks why the 3 young masters of the Su family are living outside the Fu, how should this subordinate answer?" These days, Mo Xiaoyao wanted to chase out everyone who was living in the governor's Fu. The first to bear the brunt of his anger were Feng Xiao, Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and Wei Lin, who often appeared in front of Yi Li. But the three of them were the princess consort's personal assistants and were originally supposed to live in the Fu. So Feng Xiao alone bore all of Mo Xiaoyao's anger. But Feng Xiao suddenly experienced the joy of living with everyone and refused to move out of the Fu to live in an independent residence. So every day, under Mo Xiaoyao's ravaging, he happily busied himself with work. Now that he had the chance to make trouble for Mo Xiaoyao, Feng Xiao naturally spared no effort. Feng San. Mo Xiaoyao's expression was dark as he softly said, "Get lost." Feng Xiao shrugged and didn't care at all about Mo Xiaoyao's words. People who were in a bad mood had a reason to vent. Feng Xiao raised his hands and smiled. This subordinate will leave. This subordinate will properly arrange a residence for the three young masters of the Su family. Especially fifth young master Su. I heard that he plans to stay in Ruyang to accompany the princess consort. Fifth young master Su is still young and can accompany the princess consort so that she won't be bored. Prince, don't you think so? It's fine if you don't want to work, but you don't want the princess consort to do it. As far as he knew, fifth young master Su wasn't easy to deal with. When the time comes, you'll be depressed to death. Feng San. Mo Xiaoyao suddenly smiled. He looked at Feng Xiao and said, "Now that you've reminded me, I remember. This Fu is indeed lacking a chief steward. Uncle Mo just happens to need to take care of the various properties. How about you be the chief steward of this Fu in the future?" Feng Xiao's expression froze and he hurriedly retreated in defeat. The distinguished and accomplished third young master Feng was going to become the chief steward of the Wang Fu? Compared to the various chief stewards of the various manors in the world, Feng Xiao instantly felt that his image as a peerless and elegant young master had collapsed. The other people also left. Only the two brothers, Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue, remained. The pavilion was silent. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand and poured himself a cup of wine. He held it in his hand and absent-mindedly sipped. As he pondered what Feng Xiao had just said, he wasn't in the mood to speak. Su Qingzhou was in Hangzhou, Su Qingyan was in Yunzhou, and Su Qingfeng was in the Guanyi barracks. How did the three of them get together? Most importantly, why did the three of them come to Ruyang instead of staying put? Right now, Mo Xiaoyao didn't want anyone related to Yi Li to appear in the Fu and draw away Li Li's attention. But the three of them deserved to die. It was obvious that Li Li was very important. As he was lost in thought, a gloomy coldness unconsciously spread out. The atmosphere in the originally cold room became even more solemn and gloomy. Chapter 4:15. Xiaoyao. After hesitating for a moment, Han Mingyue still opened his mouth. Mo Xiaoyao looked up at him, his eyes filled with obvious impatience. Then he lightly swept a glance at Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi helplessly frowned. In the past, Han Mingxi dared to provoke Mo Xiaoyao without any hesitation because he could clearly see Mo Xiaoyao's character. But ever since Yi Li's accident and his return, Han Mingxi felt that he couldn't understand Mo Xiaoyao anymore. Just like before, he was sure that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't do anything to him because of Yi Li. But now, even though he knew that Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't do anything to him, but every time he saw Mo Xiaoyao's gaze on him, Han Mingxi wasn't so sure. So now, under normal circumstances, he wouldn't provoke Mo Xiaoyao. Thinking of this, Han Mingxi couldn't help but smile bitterly. This was the difference between him and Mo Xiaoyao. Without strength, he didn't have the qualifications to compete with Mo Xiaoyao for Junwei's attention. Han Mingxi understood that Mo Xiaoyao was warning him that if Han Mingyue didn't know how to restrain himself, then he wouldn't be polite. But what could Han Mingxi do? No matter how muddle-headed Han Mingyue was, he was still his only big brother. He raised him, loved him, taught him how to shelter him from the wind and rain. No matter how much he couldn't understand why his talented big brother would be so dead set on abandoning everything for a woman who wasn't worth it, no matter how angry he was at Han Mingyue for abandoning his family and himself, when Han Mingyue was in danger, he still had to beg Yi Li, Han Mingxi also understood why Mo Xiaoyao didn't do anything to Han Mingyue. It wasn't because he cared about their brotherhood, but because he knew that he would have to beg Yi Li. And Mo Xiaoyao didn't want him to beg Yi Li, and didn't want him to have too much contact with Yi Li. Sighing helplessly, Han Mingxi got up and said, "Big brother, you should go back first. I still have things to discuss with Prince." Han Mingyue frowned. Looking at his brother's tired appearance, he couldn't bear to pester him and make things difficult for him. He could give up everything for Su Zuodi, but that didn't include his little brother. Seeing Han Mingyue walk out, Han Mingxi let out a sigh of relief and sat down again. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows in surprise as he looked at Han Mingxi, who was sitting opposite him. Han Mingxi's handsome face had a trace of helplessness. He looked at Mo Xiaoyao and said, "Prince, I beg you to help my big brother." Mo Xiaoyao's lips hooked up in a cold smile. "Beg me? Han Mingxi. You beg I to help your big brother? I don't see how Han Mingyue needs help. He's obviously happy to do it. What's more, why should I help?" Han Mingxi gritted his teeth and said, "I know that Su Zuodi is doomed. I only beg Prince to let my big brother live when the time comes." A dead end? Mo Xiaoyao sat up and looked at Han Mingxi. He looked at him with interest and asked, "Why don't you beg I to let Su Zuodi go and help Han Mingyue? Although I won't agree with your friendship with Li, if you beg her, she won't refuse you." Speaking of his friendship with Li, Mo Xiaoyao gnashed his teeth. Of all the people around Li, he hated Han Mingxi the most, but he promised Li not to kill Han Mingxi. But every time he saw the way Han Mingxi looked at Li, he wanted to gouge his eyes out. Han Mingxi was silent for a moment and said with a bitter smile, "Prince, why ask when you already know the answer? If it was before, I might really beg the princess to be merciful. But now, the secret that Su Zuodi is unwilling to say must be very important. Once it is said, she will die without a doubt. Although I don't know what it is now, but when the time comes, I'm afraid the princess may not be able to make the decision. What's more?" Han Mingxi sneered and said, "Who is Su Zuodi to me? Why should this young master beg for her? If she had died earlier, there wouldn't be so many problems now. You see things more clearly than Han Mingyue." Mo Xiaoyao said lightly. Both of them understood that it wasn't that Han Mingyue couldn't see things clearly, but that he didn't want to admit it. The once world-famous young master Mingyu had already fallen into a trap and couldn't wake up because of Su Zuodi. It was said that a beauty's home was a hero's grave, and this sentence was indeed true. But there's one thing that you're wrong about. There's nothing in the Ding Palace that Li Li can't decide. Looking at the silent Han Mingxi, Mo Xiaoyao continued, "As long as Li Li is happy, not to mention Su Zuodi's life, even if she wants Ai's life, I will send it to her hands. Of course, it's right that you didn't beg Li Li. If you make things difficult for Li, I will make things difficult for everyone. Han Mingyue's life, you can keep it for yourself. I have no interest in it. But you better remember clearly, if you dare to use your eyes to stare at Ai's Li again, I will dig your eyes out." Han Mingxi only felt bitterness in his throat. Mo Xiaoyao's stare was naturally not a normal stare. Yi Li had so many people around her, and there were many who were closer to her than him. Mo Xiaoyao didn't warn Feng Xiao, Qin Feng, Zhuo Jinglin, Han Wei Lin, but calmly warned him. Han Mingxi naturally knew the reason. Although he had always thought that he had concealed it well, but even if he could hide it from others, he couldn't hide it from Mo Xiaoyao, who was Yi Li's husband. Raising his head and looking at Mo Xiaoyao, Han Mingxi sneered, "Prince must also know that Prince is a rare woman. Could it be that Prince can block the eyes of the world? Or does Prince want to hide Jun Wei in a boudoir and not let anyone see her?" Mo Xiaoyao's eyes turned cold, and his smile became even colder. "I naturally won't hide Li in a boudoir. No matter where Ai is, Li will definitely be by Ai's side. But, if anyone dares to look at her, I will dig their eyes out." Han Mingxi felt a chill in his heart, but he had nothing to say. "You're just lucky to meet her first." Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows, and there was pride in his expression. "So what if Ai's luck is good?" "Han Mingxi, remember your duty. I promised Li that I wouldn't kill you. You better not force I to break my promise. Han Mingxi lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he raised his head and smiled faintly at him. Prince, think about it. Han Mingxi doesn't have any improper thoughts. I'm just friends with Mo Xiaoyao. Does Prince want to stop me? He knew that he couldn't compare to Mo Xiaoyao. Mr. Feng, you made it sound nice, but he was just a flower thief with no ability. Jun Wei didn't mind his reputation and was willing to be friends with him. However, in this chaotic world, he couldn't protect her. Ever since Han Mingxi met Yi Li, he had never regretted that he was always lazy and didn't listen to his older brother's teachings during the new year. In the end, he didn't have any accomplishments in literature or martial arts. If he had the same talent, intelligence, and martial arts as his older brother, even if he couldn't compare to Mo Xiaoyao, he would still have the confidence to compete with him. Mo Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes and looked suspiciously at the handsome man in front of him. Although he was extremely disgusted with the extraordinarily handsome man in front of him, Mo Xiaoyao had to admit that he was helping Ali wholeheartedly. Also, Li Li needed friends of her own. To put it bluntly, Mo Xiaoyao, was just jealous of Han Mingxi. Han Mingxi's appearance was better than his, and his personality was better than his. Although Han Mingxi's martial arts weren't better than his, and his status was extraordinary, what was the use? If it were Han Mingxi, he would naturally not hesitate to take Li Li and retire to the mountains to live a peaceful life. He was just afraid that Li Li would prefer a man like Han Mingxi. He was afraid that Li Li would regret marrying him. No matter what, no one in this world could take Li Li away from him. Chapter 4:16. This king will believe you this time, but you have to remember that this king's words will always be effective. Mo Xiaoyao stood up and indifferently left these words behind before flicking his sleeves and leaving. Han Mingxi sat alone by the window as he watched Mo Xiaoyao walk down the stairs, through the garden, and towards the lieutenant general's courtyard. That place held the only woman in his life that had moved his heart. A light breeze blew through the window and Han Mingxi felt a chill in his heart. Just as Feng Zhiyao had said, the three young masters of the Su family arrived at Ruyang City early the next morning. Just by looking at their exhausted bodies, it was obvious that they had traveled through the night. This made Mo Xiaoyao, who had not yet told Yi Li this news, feel unhappy. Why did they have to travel so quickly? It's not like Li would run away. However, he did not think about how happy the Su family would be when they found out that Yi Li was still alive. The fact that they did not come to the northwest was already because the situation did not allow it. Otherwise, he would have even more worries. Yi Li, on the other hand, was overjoyed at the arrival of the three brothers. Recently, she had been very idle. The two doctors did not allow her to handle any official business. Mo Xiaoyao was even more strict. He did not even allow her to touch needlework. Every day, other than eating and sleeping, she could only stroll around the manor's garden and occasionally read a book. Yi Li felt that she had never been so idle in her 2 lifetimes. After going through a life and death situation, she was naturally excited and happy to see her family again. Second brother, third brother, fifth brother, you guys, older sister Li. The youngest, Su Qingyan, was unable to contain his joy. As usual, he went up to Yi Li to talk. Mo Xiaoyao, who was standing to the side, raised his hand to separate the two. He smiled faintly and said, "Fifth brother, Li Li is pregnant now. You must be careful." Ha! It was only now that Su Qingyan realized that his cousin was no longer as light and slender as she used to be. Her body was still not round, and her belly was still bulging. Su Qingyan couldn't help but stare at Yi Li pitifully. He even ignored the strange way Mo Xiaoyao had addressed him. Su Qingze, who was sitting at the side, raised his eyebrows and looked at Mo Xiaoyao calmly. Yi Li patted Su Qingyan with a smile and said, "Long time no see, fifth brother has grown a lot taller. Sit down and talk." Seeing Yi Li being helped to the head seat by Mo Xiaoyao, Su Qingyan blinked unwillingly. He looked at Yi Li and could only sit down next to Su Qingfeng. He was the youngest in the Su family. Everyone else, including Su Qingbai, was older than Yi Li by half a year. He was the only one who was Yi Li's younger brother. The age difference between the two wasn't that big. They grew up together. Unlike the other brothers who protected Yi Li, Su Qingyan was the one who was protected by Yi Li. He never treated Yi Li as his cousin. He only thought of her as his biological sister. When the Su family moved out of Beijing, they cried endlessly because Yi Li couldn't go with them. They almost stayed in Beijing as well. Although Su Qingbai was young, he didn't miss Mo Xiaoyao's possessiveness. His dissatisfaction with Mo Xiaoyao grew exponentially. This fellow caused Sister Li to do so much for him and almost lost her life. What was the meaning of this? He actually dared to guard against this young master. The revenge of a young man was terrifying. Su Qingyan decided on the spot that if Mo Xiaoyao didn't let him pester Sister Li, then he would pester Sister Li. Mo Xiaoyao obviously noticed Su Qingyan's provocative gaze. His phoenix eyes slightly darkened as he coldly glanced at Su Qingyan. His eyes were full of threat. Who was Su Qingyan? How could he be frightened by a mere glance? He raised his eyebrows and grinned at Mo Xiaoyao. While the two of them were fighting fiercely, Yi Li and Su Qingfeng were chatting happily. Yi Li looked at Su Qingfeng, who seemed to have calmed down a lot after not seeing him for a long time. She asked curiously, second brother, third brother, and fifth brother, why are they together? Su Qingfeng laughed and said, I was originally in the northwest. Little Wu, on the other hand, ran to the northwest overnight when she heard that something happened to you. However, she got lost and went to the south. I happened to find her, so I brought her with me to the northwest. What Su Qingfeng didn't say was that he had brought Su Qingyan and Su Qingyan around Hong province for a month or two, hoping to find Yi Li by chance. In the end, they met Su Qingze, who had gone to Hong province to take up a post. Only then did the three brothers get together. However, Su Qingfeng and Su Qingyan's whereabouts weren't suitable for outsiders to know, so Su Qingze didn't even mention it to Mo Xiaoyao. During those months, Mo Xiaoyao was distracted and didn't pay attention to these matters. Yi Li frowned and said, isn't third brother in the army? Su Qingfeng's identity was special. If he wanted to leave, it was impossible for him to not attract the attention of the higher-ups. She couldn't help but suspect that Su Qingfeng had become a deserter. Su Qingfeng waved his hand and said with a smile, the emperor doesn't really want our Su family to produce another general. I only said that little Five had run away from home and I wanted to go find him, and it was approved in a few days. Yi Li felt a bit apologetic. She knew that Su Qingfeng had been ostracized quite a bit in the army. This wasn't just because he was the son of the Su family, but also because he was Princess Ding's older cousin. How are grandfather and uncle? Where are big brother and fourth brother? Yi Li asked anxiously. The Shadow Guard had also sent back this information, but it wasn't as reassuring as hearing it from her own family. Su Qingze calmly said, the Southwest is currently at war. Old Fourth has been summoned back to the capital. Eldest uncle wants him and father to resign and live in seclusion. However, the emperor might not agree. Grandfather and father are fine, but big brother. Su Qingze frowned and said, Big brother only sent a message saying that he's in the south, but we don't know where he is or what he's doing. Young Master Qingqian's whereabouts were unknown. Even the Shadow Guard and Tianyi Pavilion might not be able to find him. If he didn't say anything, no one could be sure of his whereabouts. Yi Li frowned slightly and said, currently, only Mo Jingqi knows about fourth brother's whereabouts in the Su family. Will Mo Jingqi become suspicious of the Su family because of this? Su Qingfeng sneered and said, when did he stop being suspicious of the Su family? As long as grandfather is still alive and the Su family hasn't openly rebelled, he won't do anything to grandfather, eldest uncle, and father, even if it's for the sake of his reputation. Third brother. Su Qingze frowned and glanced at Su Qingfeng disapprovingly. Su Qingfeng snorted and remained silent. Yi Li frowned. She understood the history of the Su family. Yili felt that she somewhat understood the thoughts of her grandfather and uncle. Now that big brother was in the south, second brother, third brother, and fifth brother were in the northwest, even if the emperor really wanted to do something to the Su family, he wouldn't be able to catch them all in one fell swoop. As long as grandfather and eldest uncle were still in Yunzhou, and as long as second uncle was still in the capital, even if the Su family and Ding King's estate were inextricably linked because of her, the emperor wouldn't dare to rashly say that the Su family had disloyal intentions. After all, the Su family was the head of the world's literati. Their influence could definitely be said to be boundless. If they really forced the Su family into a corner, Mo Jingqi wouldn't be able to escape. Grandfather and eldest uncle were buying time for the northwest. Taking a deep breath, Yili planned to make a trip to Yunzhou when she went to the capital to retrieve the Biluo flower. Chapter 4:17. The three of them chatted for less than an hour before Mo Xiaoyao stood up and smiled at Yili. Yili, it's time to let Mr. Shen take your pulse. Let Qingze and the others rest as well. They rushed here overnight. Let's hold a banquet to welcome them tonight. Yili glanced at the travel-worn trio and said in annoyance, I forgot that second brother, third brother, and fifth brother must have been tired from the journey. I just kept chatting with you. Second brother, your courtyard is still open. Go wash up and rest with third brother and fifth brother. We'll talk about it later. Su Qingyan blinked his eyes and looked at Yili. Sisterly, little five hasn't spoken much with sisterly yet. Yili smiled and looked at the youth who was a head taller than her. She smiled and said, second brother's courtyard is just beside the main courtyard. We have plenty of time. When you've rested enough, you can come and talk to me at any time. Su Qingyan's eyes lit up and he smiled happily. Really? He glanced suspiciously at a certain someone and said, when the time comes, there won't be anyone who won't allow Qingyan to talk to sisterly, right? Yili patted his head and smiled. How can that be? Little five is sister's only younger brother. Who would dare to stop you from talking to me? Su Qingyan proudly glanced at Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao's eyes darkened and he glanced at Su Qingyan. He smiled and said, Li is right. If Sister Li wants to talk to fifth brother, you can talk to him at any time. Fifth brother is still young and has plenty of time. What he meant was that other than chatting with Yili, Su Qingyan was just a good-for-nothing who didn't know how to eat and drink. Su Qingyan gritted his teeth and smiled even more brightly. Brother-in-law is right. I will always be by Sister Li's side. Sister Li will be lonely and bored when brother-in-law is busy with political affairs. After personally sending Su Qingze and the others back to their courtyard to rest, Yili looked amusedly at Mo Xiaoyao who had a dark expression on his face. She sighed softly, little five is still a child, why are you being so calculative with him? She had naturally seen the interaction between Su Qingyan and Mo Xiaoyao earlier, but she had not said anything. At this moment, Mo Xiaoyao's face was so gloomy that ink was about to drip out. His thin lips were tightly pursed and he looked even more like a child throwing a tantrum. Mo Xiaoyao snorted. After a while, he said, he's already 15 years old. How can he be considered a child? Yili raised a hand to pinch his handsome face. She smiled and said, even if he's 20 years old, he's still my younger brother. After saying this, Yili looked Mo Xiaoyao up and down. She tilted her head and said, speaking of which, Mo Xiaoyao, have you become addicted to jealousy recently? Aren't you afraid that you'll die from jealousy? It was one thing to be picky about Han Mingxi. Although Han Mingxi's thoughts had never been made clear, Yili knew a little about them. Therefore, she was not as close to Han Mingxi as she was to Feng Jiao or Qin Feng. However, if she was picky about Su Qingyan, then she was going overboard. Most importantly, Yili really didn't understand where Mo Xiaoyao's wariness came from. In Yili's opinion, whether it was martial arts, intelligence, or power, there were very few people in the world who could compare to Mo Xiaoyao. In the past, Mo Xiaoyao wasn't so unconfident in himself. If it was because he had just returned from his tribulation, then it would be a bit of an exaggeration to say that she hadn't recovered after half a month. Mo Xiaoyao trapped her in his arms. He lowered his head and gently bit her fragrant cherry lips. He said in a low voice, "Can't I just be jealous? Li, you're not allowed to be nice to other men. I'll get angry." Yi Li was helpless. Little Five isn't other men. Su Qingyan was her younger brother. She had treated him like her own little brother since he was young. "Other than me, all other men are other men," Mo Xiaoyao said in a domineering tone. Yi Li almost wanted to roll her eyes at him. She grabbed his hand and placed it on her round belly. She smiled and asked, "Then what about him?" Both Mr. Shen and Dr. Lin said it was a boy. "Is he also another man?" Mo Xiaoyao said matter-of-factly, "Of course. When he's born, I'll throw him, give him to Mr. Qingyun. The child taught by Mr. Qingyun will definitely be outstanding. Outstanding to the point that he hated it. If he didn't already know that Li only treated the members of the Su family as her brothers, and that the members of the Su family only treated Yi Li as their younger sister, he would have died of jealousy long ago. Under Yi Li's threatening gaze, Mo Xiaoyao unwillingly swallowed back the word throw and changed to a more euphemistic way of saying it. Yi Li felt that one day she would be angered to death by this man. She turned around in Mo Xiaoyao's arms to face him and raised her hand to pinch his face. "Mo Xiaoyao, he's your son." Mo Xiaoyao narrowed his eyes and glanced at the round place. He snorted coldly, "Other men." He didn't like that thing for a long time. If she wasn't pregnant, Li wouldn't have almost died because of her difficulty in moving. If she wasn't pregnant, he wouldn't have to endure being unable to get close to Li. All because that bastard Shenyang said. Thinking of Shenyang's gloating old face, Mo Xiaoyao felt that this fellow hiding in Li's stomach was even more of an eyesore. Of course, he was also wrong. He swore that when this child was born, he would never let Li get pregnant again. It was dangerous, troublesome, and annoying. Towards such a childish man, Yi Li was completely helpless. However, looking at his aggrieved and stubborn eyes, Yi Li felt an inexplicable sense of cuteness and heartache. She couldn't bring herself to throw a tantrum. She pulled Mo Xiaoyao to sit down. Yi Li didn't mind and sat on his lap. She turned his face to face her. "Young master, can we not be so childish?" Mo Xiaoyao unhappily opened his mouth and bit Yi Li's slender fingers. However, he couldn't bear to use too much force and only lightly bit before letting go. "I am not childish. Even if I am, Li, you can't dislike I for leaning into Mo Xiaoyao's embrace." Yi Li sighed softly. Shenyang had casually mentioned Mo Xiaoyao's condition when he was taking her pulse. If it was a normal family, she wouldn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. His possessiveness was also proof that Mo Xiaoyao truly loved her. Even though she was slightly worried right now, how could she not feel a trace of joy? However, right now, she couldn't let Mo Xiaoyao lose all confidence in himself like this. She knew that her fall from the cliff had released all the negative emotions Mo Xiaoyao had hidden in his heart, such as inferiority, resentment, and powerlessness. They had even been magnified infinitely. Even though Mo Xiaoyao always seemed to blame her fall on the child, Genom of Gojoseon, Mo Jingqi, or even Su Zuodi, in his heart, he truly felt that it was all his own fault. He felt that it was his inability to protect her that had caused her to meet with danger. Yi Li had always wanted to talk to him, but when faced with Mo Xiaoyao, she didn't know how to start. "Xiaoyao." She raised her hand and took off the mask on his face. Dr. Lin's medicine was indeed effective. Even though it had only been a few days, the scars on Mo Xiaoyao's face had already changed. Even if it didn't completely disappear in the future, Yi Li believed that it would get much better. She raised her hand and hooked it around his neck. Yi Li gently kissed the scar on the left side of his face. Mo Xiaoyao was startled. He hugged Yi Li as if he couldn't react for a moment. Yi Li kissed his cheek and said in a low voice, "Xiaoyao, no matter how many people there are in the world, in my heart, only you are the most outstanding one. Do you understand?" Chapter 418. Mo Xiaoyao's long eyelashes fluttered as he looked up at the beautiful woman with a sweet smile in front of him. His wife, the one and only woman he loved the most in this life. She said that in her heart, he was the only one who was the most outstanding. Those gentle words made his heart fill with boundless joy, even more so than when his father praised him when he was young. At the same time, it also made his heart fill with even more guilt and resentment. Why couldn't I have met you at the best time of my life? Xiao Yao, in this world, there are many handsome, talented, and powerful men in this world. But I met you. I didn't meet the young master of the Prince Ding mansion, but you, the prince of the country, Mo Xiaoyao. Do you understand? Xiaoyao, if I met you 10 years ago, I definitely wouldn't have loved you. Yi Li softly muttered. 10 years ago, Mo Xiaoyao was too young, so young that she, who had experienced 2 lives, felt that he was too young. At that time, that peerlessly beautiful and radiant youth was an existence that Yi Li would have avoided like the plague. And at that time, Mo Xiaoyao also wouldn't have taken a fancy to a nameless daughter of the minister's mansion. It wasn't that the young Mo Xiaoyao judged people based on appearance, but at that age, Mo Xiaoyao probably didn't put any woman in his eyes. So even the world's #1 beauty like Su Zuidi was only a betrayed ex-fiancée in Mo Xiaoyao's heart. There was no love, so there was no hate. If it wasn't for these 10 years of experience, Yi Li wouldn't have taken a fancy to Mo Xiaoyao, and Mo Xiaoyao wouldn't have fallen in love with Yi Li. They had met each other at their worst times, but Yi Li still felt that they had met the right person at the right time. Then, does Li Li love me now? Mo Xiaoyao asked in a low voice, his gaze unwaveringly looking at the beautiful face in front of him. He knew that Li Li was right, but he couldn't imagine what would happen if he missed this woman in this life. I love you. Yi Li said in a low voice without hiding anything. She loved this man, she had unknowingly fallen in love with him. So she was willing to work hard for him, willing to do everything for him. So she was proud of his excellence, but at the same time, her heart ached for his pain and weakness. When a woman was willing to unconditionally indulge a man, she must love him. Li Li. Mo Xiaoyao sighed in satisfaction. He lowered his head and kissed the lips that he had been coveting for a long time. He pried open her teeth and provoked her to dance with him. Ah Li, I love you. Mo Xiaoyao will only love you in this life. Reporting, Prince, the capital city, a hurried male voice interrupted the passionate passion in the room. Standing at the door, Feng Zhiao only had one word in his mind, it's over. He had actually disturbed the prince and Wang Fei's intimate moment. Most importantly, damn it, if you want to be intimate, can't you go inside? Even if there was a screen, it would be good. Mo Xiaoyao, do you need to be so thirsty? Wang Fei is pregnant, you beast. When Feng Zhiao was standing at the door imagining all kinds of things, he forgot to look at Mo Xiaoyao's dark expression. Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao staring at Feng Zhiao and felt a chill. She helplessly pulled on his sleeve and shook it. Even though it was a bit shocking for someone to see this, but Yi Li was not a woman born in this era. What kind of things had she not seen in her previous life? They were just being caught kissing, they were still husband and wife. So Yi Li felt a bit uncomfortable and then passed. But Feng Zhiao, who was standing at the door, looked at his strange and conflicted expression and knew that he was overthinking things. Giving a light cough, Yi Li reminded him in a quiet voice, Feng-san, come in and talk. Feng Zhiao suddenly came back to his senses. When he saw Mo Xiaoyao's dangerous and dark gaze, he wanted to punch himself. After spoiling the prince's happy moment, he didn't run away and was standing here in a daze. He, Feng Zhiao, was really becoming worse and worse. He looked pitifully at Mo Xiaoyao with a sad face. Mo Xiaoyao gave a cold snort and allowed it. Feng Zhiao happily thanked Yi Li and then walked in. However, he still carefully chose a spot closest to the door so that if something happened, he could escape at the first moment. Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li naturally saw his behavior. Yi Li covered her mouth and snickered. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and ignored him. What's going on in the capital? Speaking of business, Feng Zhiao immediately returned to normal and said respectfully, there's news from the capital. Mo Jingqi sent 2 princes, Elder Su, and a few other important court officials to the northwest. They'll probably arrive in a few days. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows. Sending important officials to the northwest? What for? Feng Zhiyao rubbed his chin and smiled. What else? They're probably here to persuade the prince. The 200,000 Dechu state troops stationed outside Feihong Pass were easily driven back into the pass by us. At the time, Mo Jingqi was so angry that he issued several edicts to scold the prince. It's been so long, it's time for him to come back to his senses. Mo Jingqi was not really an idiot. As long as the Prince Ding Mansion did not say the opposite, he naturally would not meet the Prince Ding Mansion on the battlefield at this time. He had not finished dealing with Xiling and the northern tribes. If the Prince Ding Mansion came out to mess things up now, the court would be in danger. He was also certain that Mo Xiaoyao would not easily fall out with the court, so he thought of doing this to let the world see his generosity. What he did not understand was that he was not the only one who needed time. The Mahist army in the northwest also needed time. Who are those people? Mo Xiaoyao asked. Feng Zhiyao said, it's De Wang Mo Xiafei, Yuang Mo Jingyu, and Su Zhe, as well as the assistant minister of appointments Mo Jian. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. Without mentioning Su Zhe and Mo Jingqi, De Wang Mo Xiafei was the previous emperor's second brother. Mo Jingqi also had to respectfully address him as imperial uncle. Yuang Mo Jingyu was Mo Jingqi's half-brother. He usually kept a low profile and did not like to pay attention to worldly affairs. It was unknown why Mo Jingqi had sent him. The 2 princes were important officials. Mo Jingqi had sent an envoy with great sincerity this time. Unfortunately, Mo Xiaoyao did not plan to give him too much face. Yili frowned and said, the northwest is far away from the capital. Why would Mo Jingqi send Elder Su? Su Zhe was already over 70 years old, and his health had not been good these past few years. Logically speaking, this kind of task should not be sent to such an old official. If something happened on the way, it would not be good. Feng Zhiyao thought for a moment and said, could it be that Mo Jingqi knows that Su Zuodi is still alive, so he sent Elder Su? Mo Xiaoyao said, it's been half a year. Mo Jingqi should have heard the news. Even if he did not know before, he should know now. Su Zuodi. If Su Zuodi could actually arouse Mo Jingqi's interest, then. Mo Xiaoyao's face darkened, the coldness in his eyes becoming even more frightening. What does the prince plan to do with these people? Feng Zhiyao asked. He did not have any feelings for the 2 princes, but Su Zhe and Mo Jian were rare upright officials in the court. Moreover, Su Zhe could be considered Mo Xiaoyao's half-teacher. Mo Xiaoyao had always respected him. Mo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said, don't worry about it. I asked you to draft the list of appointed officials in the northwest. Have you finished drafting it? Chapter 419. Feng Zhiyao took out a booklet and handed it over. Mo Xiaoyao casually flipped through it and handed it to Yili beside him. He said, that's pretty much it. The news should be announced after Mo Jingqi's people arrive. Previously, you said that the people of the city wanted to hold a lantern festival to pray for Wang Fei and Shitzi. Set it on the same day. When the time comes, the officials of the city will celebrate with the people. It can also be considered welcoming the emissary from the court. Also, has the new fu been built? It's not a good idea for us to always occupy the governor's fu. When the new governor takes office, we can't let him work in a civilian residence, right? Feng Zhiyao agreed. Mo Xiaoyao's actions were clearly provoking the emissary sent by Mo Jingqi, but he liked it. He smiled as he said, the fu has been prepared long ago. It was originally the fu of the richest man in Ruyang City. That person fled to the pass with the garrison. This subordinate ordered people to reconstruct the 2 courtyards on the left and right side of the fu. Although it is not as grand as the Wang Fu in Jing City, it is still barely livable. That fu is now in the southeast of the city center. However, according to the new plan of Ryang City, after the reconstruction, the Fu will be in the center of Ryang City. Naturally, there were people who had already taken care of these trivial matters. However, the prince was in a bad mood and did not mention moving, so the subordinates did not dare to say anything. This led to the present situation. The officials who were temporarily in charge of the affairs of the city still worked in the yamen in front of the governor's Fu. However, after they finished their work, they had to take all the documents back to their temporary residence. It was fine during normal times, but if it was winter or rainy, it was very troublesome to run back and forth. Very good. Mo Xiaoyao nodded in satisfaction and said, have people quickly tidy up the place. Feng Zhiyao said with a smile, it has been prepared long ago. Prince and Wang Fei can move in at any time. However, please have Prince inscribe the words on the board of the Fu. Originally, this matter did not need to be too difficult, but now that Mo Xiaoyao's title had been taken by Mo Jingqi, no one could decide what words to inscribe on the new Fu. Therefore, it was better to ask Prince to do the questions himself. Mo Xiaoyao didn't care at all. He said calmly, let's go with the Prince Ding mansion. Feng Zhiyao stared blankly for a moment. It wasn't the imperial residence in the capital, but the three simple words, Prince Ding mansion. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's nonchalant attitude, it was clear that he did not care about the fact that Mo Jingqi had stolen his title. He could not help but smile and said, this subordinate obeys. Because of Yi Li's return, although there was no big movement in Ryang City, everyone could feel that something was different. The common people in the city busied themselves with their lives. The soldiers stationed in the city seemed to have shaken off their previous gloominess like their masters. They appeared to be full of vitality. The entire city was thriving. Yi Li's courtyard was still unusually quiet and comfortable. The second day after Su Qingze returned to the city, he had been caught by Feng Zhiyao to work. Su Qingfeng and Su Qingyan did not have anything to do. Every day, Su Qingyan would drag Su Qingfeng to Yi Li's courtyard. If they were not chatting, they were playing chess. Their days were leisurely and comfortable. Every time Mo Xiaoyao saw this, he wanted to kick him out of Ryang City. However, with Yi Li's words of love that day, Mo Xiaoyao's mood clearly improved greatly. However, every time he saw Su Qingyan, he couldn't help but frown. On the chessboard, the black and white pieces were fighting fiercely. Somewhere outside the courtyard, there was also an endless battle going on. Su Qingyan gripped a piece and said with a frown, Li Jijia, is this Fu really suitable for nurturing a fetus? They come here every few days. After living here for a few days, Su Qingyan was already used to the occasional assassination attempts in the Fu. Anyone who saw this every day would get used to it. Su Qingyan could only admire the patience of these assassins. They fought and lost, but they kept fighting. It was just too annoying. Yi Li leisurely took a sip of the white fungus soup that a servant girl beside her had delivered. She smiled faintly and said, no matter. This Fu is just too boring. It's good to be lively once in a while. Su Qingyan deeply agreed. Mo Xiaoyao was afraid that other people would disturb Yi Li's rest. Other than Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, and Shenyang and Dr. Lin who treated Yi Li, normal people in the Fu could not get close to Wang Fei's courtyard. If something happened in the Fu, it was directly reported to Mo Xiaoyao. No one dared to use these trivial matters to bother Yi Li. This was originally with good intentions, but this way, Yi Li was bored. She snorted softly and said, Prince Ding is really petty. What's wrong with Li Jijia going out for a walk? It's as if he's afraid that other people will take a second look. Li Jijia is so outstanding that everyone in the world admires her. Speaking of this, Su Qingyan couldn't help but feel proud. There were many beautiful women in the world, but whose sister could lead tens of thousands of soldiers to fight against a strong enemy? Only his, Su Qingyan's, sister. In the future, he would definitely marry a woman as strong as Li Jijia. Yi Li raised a hand and knocked Su Qingyan on the head. She glanced at him and said, call me brother-in-law. Do you think Mo Xiaoyao hasn't tormented you enough? Su Qingyan was suddenly depressed. These past few days, he had fought with Mo Xiaoyao. For the time being, he couldn't fight against Mo Xiaoyao, that treacherous villain. Although Mo Xiaoyao would let him win in front of Li Jijia, behind his back, Su Qingyan would think of ways to trip him up and use underhanded methods. Yesterday, he even slandered Li Jijia, saying that he had taken a fancy to a beautiful girl in the city and wanted Li Jijia to write a letter to his parents to arrange a marriage for him. If this really reached his father's ears, wouldn't he be skinned alive? His older brothers hadn't even gotten married yet. He, the youngest one, had taken a fancy to another family's girl. Liking beauty was his crime. Li Jijia knows about it. Su Qingyan was dejected. He couldn't fight against Mo Xiaoyao. Now that Li Jijia knew about it, he felt that he had lost face. Su Qingfeng, who was watching from the side, sneered. He raised his hand and knocked on Su Qingyan's head. Second brother, third brother already told you not to provoke Prince. You just wouldn't listen. Su Qingyan glared at him. He's clearly the one who's targeting me. Su Qingfeng raised his eyebrows. Then why isn't Prince targeting your second brother and me? So, isn't this what you asked for? Su Qingyan laid on the table and sighed. Third brother, I'm your younger brother. He really missed fourth brother. If fourth brother was here, he would definitely help him fight against Mo Xiaoyao. Listening to Su Qingyan's chatter, Yili smiled and put down a chess piece. She asked, that's right, has third brother been bored in the Fu these past few days? Su Qingyan was still a child. He could find fun anywhere. Su Qingfeng, as a grown man, didn't go anywhere in the Fu. It was indeed a bit difficult for him. Su Qingfeng smiled and said, it's a bit boring compared to the army, but it's fine. Once you give birth to the child, I should return to the capital. Third brother and second brother aren't in the capital, so father and mother will be worried. When this was brought up, Yili frowned and said, speaking of which, second brother is in the northwest now. Does the emperor in the capital make things difficult for second uncle? There's also Zheng Er. Her wedding with second brother was set for last year, but now. Su Qingfeng comforted her, it's fine. If the emperor wants to make things difficult for our Su family, he can find a reason. He won't make things difficult for father because of this. Moreover, father also said that he doesn't want second brother to go back now. I don't know what the current situation in the capital is like. Second brother isn't someone like fourth brother. If he gets involved, it'll be hard for him to extricate himself. As for young Miss Qin. Chapter 420. Su Qingfeng helplessly scratched his head. Right now, he could only rejoice that he hadn't had time to get engaged. Otherwise, wouldn't he be delaying the girl's future? If there were any accidents in the future, he was afraid that his wife's family would be implicated. Right now, our Su family isn't having a good time. It's actually a good thing that the Qin family's young miss hasn't married into our family yet. I heard that second brother had someone bring a letter back to our parents. If there's a good family, we'll ask the Qin family's young miss to marry on her own. Yili frowned. She had a very good relationship with Qin Zheng. How could she not see that Qin Zheng was deeply in love with her second brother? Moreover, the two had been engaged since they were young. For more than 10 years, Qin Zheng's thoughts had only been on her second brother. Now, asking her to marry on her own was a bit. Although she knew that second brother was doing this for Qin Zheng's sake, she still felt that he deserved a beating. On the other hand, Yili also felt a bit apologetic towards Qin Zheng. In the end, wasn't it all because of her that second brother had followed the army to the northwest and was now stuck in the northwest? Su Qingyan looked at Yili and said with a grin, sisterly, this isn't your fault. With our family's current situation, it's better if we don't implicate more people. Who knows when the palace will execute the entire family? At that time, not only will the Qin family's sister be implicated, even the Qin family will be implicated. Su Qingfeng frowned and patted Su Qingyan, you brat, you really shoot your mouth off. Su Qingyan made a face. The only advantage of being in the northwest, especially in this Fu, was that they could speak without worry. They didn't have to worry about the walls having ears. Yili lowered her head to look at her increasingly difficult figure and sighed, "There's nothing we can do now. Later, third brother, please write a letter to Aunt to inquire about the Qin family. Since third brother feels bored, why don't you go to the military camp outside the city for a while?" Su Qingfeng's eyes immediately lit up. Even Su Qingyan's face had an excited and curious expression. The Mahist army was the elite army of Dechu state. Su Qingfeng had naturally admired it for a long time. However, due to her special status, it wasn't appropriate for her to go to the military camp to prevent outsiders from gossiping about Yili. Hesitantly, he asked, "Isn't this against the rules?" Yili smiled faintly, "What's there to worry about? It's not like we're asking third brother to lead an army to war." Su Qingfeng nodded and said with a smile, "Li is right. If I can join the Mahist army, I don't mind being a pawn. I don't think others know who I am." When Qingfeng heard this, he looked at Su Qingfeng and said with a smile, "If third young master Su is willing to suffer, you might as well come to my place." After all, there were many people in the Mahist army camp, and Qilin was directly under the princess consort, so it was naturally more convenient. Su Qingyan blinked, "Big brother Qin, can I go?" Qingfeng looked at him and shook his head, saying, "Fifth young master probably won't last a day." Su Qingyan wasn't convinced. He glared and said, "Why can third brother but I can't? You look down on my young age, but I'll do it for you." Qingfeng shook his head and said with a smile, "It's not that I look down on your young age. Right now, I have two people even younger than fifth young master. However, fifth young master has been pampered since childhood and doesn't practice martial arts. That's why I said fifth young master can't stand it." Yili smiled and looked at Qingfeng, saying, "Can third brother go to your place?" Qingfeng said, "But Wang Fei only needs to say one word. Third young master can go at any time." Yili waved her hand and said, "The prince and I have handed Qilin to you, so you have the final say." Although Qingfeng didn't show it on his face, in his heart, he was very grateful for Yili's trust. He looked at Su Qingfeng and said, "In that case, third young master should report outside the city tomorrow morning. But I'll say this first. When the time comes, I won't be merciful. If third young master can't stand it, I'll have to send you back." Su Qingfeng had also heard of Qilin's mysteriousness and fame. He was also eager to give it a try. He laughed loudly and said, "In that case, Commander Qin doesn't need to call me third young master. You can call me by my name." After saying this, Yili asked, "Why are you here at this time?" Qingfeng nodded and handed over a sealed file, saying, "Although the prince doesn't want to disturb Wang Fei's rest, this subordinate still wants Wang Fei to take a look. This is the training plan for next month. I hope Wang Fei can give me some pointers." For the past few months, Qingfeng had been in charge of Qilin's training alone. Occasionally, he would discuss it with Zhuojing, Lin Han, and the others. Qilin's starting point was too high. Thus, Qingfeng had always been a little nervous. Now that Yili was back, he naturally couldn't help but want Yili to take a look. Even if he didn't praise her, he could at least let her know if there were any problems with his training. Yili put the file to one side and said with a smile, "I'll take a look at it later. You can do it according to your own ideas. I'll teach you most of what I can teach you. In another 3 months, I should be able to take action. Your subordinates should also be done with their training. When the time comes, I'll personally go and see them." Qingfeng was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Thank you, Wang Fei. This subordinate understands." He immediately decided that when the time came, he would ask Wang Fei to personally design the final assessment for the group of youngsters. Last year, the final assessment for the first batch couldn't be carried out because of an unexpected incident. Qingfeng had always felt deeply regretful. This time, even the elders had recovered. "That's right, Wang Fei. When this subordinate came over, I saw the shadow guard catch a few more assassins. Qin Feng remembered what he had seen when he came over and said casually. Yili smiled and said, "The Shadow Guard should be overcrowded these days, right? Catching assassins every day and keeping them alive." She didn't know what Imo Xiaoyao was planning to do with these people. Qin Feng said with a smile, "Isn't that so? This morning, I saw Imo Hua's expression was very ugly. He even said that he wanted to borrow our prison cell to lock people up." Yili thought for a moment and said, "No matter what, don't lock those assassins up with Su Zuidi. Tell Imo Hua that those who aren't that important shouldn't stay with him." Qin Feng nodded and said, "This subordinate also said the same thing. But the prince didn't allow them to be killed. He said it would be useful." Yili nodded, "Let's do whatever the prince says. What's wrong with I?" Imo Xiaoyao was dressed in a green robe. His hair was as white as snow. He stood under the moon gate and asked everyone with a smile. Yili's body wasn't well and she was too lazy to get up. She smiled and asked, "Why did you come back? Be careful that Feng San comes over to complain." Everyone stood up and saluted him. Imo Xiaoyao casually waved his hand and walked over to Yili to sit down. He said with a bit of displeasure, "Imo Jingqi's people have arrived. They're preparing to go and greet them. Otherwise, how could I come back so leisurely?" Yili sat up straight. "De Wang and the others have arrived. Prince isn't going to greet them?" Imo Xiaoyao curled his lips, "I don't have that kind of skill." Feng San went. Yili couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. "You might as well have sent Feng San over to greet them." Although Feng Zhiao was Imo Xiaoyao's most trusted aide, Feng Zhiao was unwilling to accept the imperial court's rewards. Perhaps it was because of his strange temperament or some other reason. Thus, until now, Feng Zhiao was still a virgin. Moreover, he was in charge of many things, so everyone addressed him casually. On the battlefield, they called him General Feng. The officials in Ruyang City called him Lord Feng. Imo Xiaoyao's trusted aides called him Young Master Feng San. In reality, Feng Zhiao himself didn't even have the lowest rank of official. It was said that De Wang was a person who cared the most about ostentation and face. If he sent Feng Zhiao, he would definitely be angered. Chapter 421. It was Feng San who wanted to go. Imo Xiaoyao said. He didn't plan on sending people to the city gates to welcome them. It was already good enough that they could enter the city. Yili was silent. So Feng Zhiao was afraid that you would anger them to death, so he decided to go and anger them half to death himself? Imo Xiaoyao leaned against Yili and sat down lazily. He smiled and said, "Li doesn't need to worry about these trivial matters. How could I not know what De Wang and the others want to say? I'm just too lazy to pay attention to them." Yili helplessly pushed him to sit upright. "Tonight's welcoming banquet still has to be held, right? Prince, don't tell me that you're even skipping this. If word gets out, people will think that we don't know how to treat guests." Imo Xiaoyao frowned and sighed. Without Uncle Imo, it's really quite troublesome. If it was in the past, Uncle Imo would have directly taken care of these small matters and only needed to report to them. But now, most of the Prince Ding mansion's power had been transferred to the northwest, so Uncle Imo couldn't immediately come over. Otherwise, it would be troublesome if there was no one to manage the internal affairs. It's a pity that Feng San isn't willing to be the steward. Yili glanced at him. Letting Feng Zhiao be the steward was truly worthy of being Prince Ding's idea. Shaking her head, Yili said, "Forget it, I'll have Wei Lin and Lin Han do it later." If the dignified Prince Ding mansion couldn't find someone who could be the steward, wouldn't it be a joke if word got out? Imo Xiaoyao nodded in satisfaction and smiled. Zhuo Jing and the others by Li Li's side are all capable. One of them can definitely take Uncle Mo's place first. Yili thought about how Zhuo Jing and the others were like Uncle Imo, worrying about all kinds of things in the prince's residence all day long and couldn't help but shiver. The three of them had been with her for a long time. As their master, she couldn't be too disloyal. They're too young. Let's bring up a trustworthy steward later. Mo Xiaoyao shrugged his shoulders regretfully in agreement. At the city gate of Ruyang City, Feng Zhiyao stood with a smile on his face. He was accompanied by a few officials who were in charge of the affairs of the city, as well as many commoners who were watching the bustling scene. The officials of Ruyang City were all dressed in casual clothes, which made young Master Feng San look even more charming in his red robe. Compared to the casual appearance of the host, the other party's men and horses were all dressed in official robes, which made them seem especially grand and strange. Feng Zhiyao held his fan and leaned against the city wall. He asked casually, "It's such a hot day. Don't they feel hot wearing so much?" That was why he said, what was so good about being an official? On such a hot day, they had to wear so many layers of clothing. Weren't they afraid of getting sick from the heat? The Chu state was known as the state of etiquette. Even in summer, there were 4 or 5 layers of court robes. Moreover, the court robes weren't made of soft and breathable gauze. Instead, they were made to show the majesty of the imperial family. The court robes were usually made of heavy and gorgeous cloud brocade. One could tell how hot it was just by looking at how sweaty the guards were. No one answered his question because the procession in front of him had already reached the city gate. The commoners of Ruyang City were very curious. The northwest was remote. If there wasn't anything going on, they wouldn't see a true high-ranking official or noble person for decades. The most important person the commoners could see was the governor of the city. Currently, Prince Ding lived in Ruyang City. Now, 2 more princes and several other high-ranking officials had arrived. The commoners naturally flocked to the city gate to see the heat, to welcome the imperial envoy. Hundreds of guards escorted the long procession to the city gate. A slightly stout old man stepped out of the first red sandalwood carriage. He wore a dark purple robe with an embroidered pattern. His hair and beard were white, but his expression was arrogant. He seemed to look down on all living things. He stepped on a guard's blanket and landed. He glanced at the people standing at the city gate. His expression immediately darkened. Feng Zhiyao acted as if he did not see his expression. With a smile on his face, he went forward and cupped his hands in greeting. Feng San of Ding Wang Fu has come under Wang Ye's orders to welcome the 2 Wang Ye and Darren. Feng San greets De Wang. Feng San, Feng Zhiyao. Prince De looked at Feng Zhiyao with a dark expression. Prince De had naturally heard of Feng Zhiyao's reputation. Normally, he wouldn't mind giving some face to the younger generation. However, Mo Xiaoyao had sent a commoner with an official position to welcome them. This was a slap to his face. Prince De was so old that even the emperor had to show him some respect. How could he tolerate this? Feng Zhiyao smiled. It really is me. Your Highness Prince De has a good memory. Prince De coldly said, "Where is Mo Xiaoyao?" Although Prince De was old, he was of the same generation as Mo Xiaoyao. In addition to the status of the Prince Ding mansion, Prince De had to address him as Prince Ding. However, since Mo Xiaoyao didn't give him face, he naturally didn't plan on giving face to Mo Xiaoyao either. He didn't hold back and directly called him by his name. Feng Zhiyao didn't get angry. He smiled and said, "Wang Fei is pregnant. Prince De is worried about Wang Fei and little Shitzi." Thus, he didn't have time to welcome Prince De. "Please forgive me, Prince." Prince De's face alternated between green and white. Feng Zhiyao spoke tactfully, but the meaning behind his words was very clear. "Prince Ding De is busy with Wang Fei and doesn't have time to welcome you." Impudence. His Majesty has already taken away Mo Xiaoyao's title. How dare you call him Prince De? Prince De angrily rebuked. Feng Zhiyao slightly lowered his eyes. The officials standing behind him were all trusted aides of the Prince Ding mansion. How could they tolerate Prince De's rudeness? Just as he was about to step forward to argue, Prince Yu in the carriage behind him caught up. He hurriedly pulled Prince De to smooth things over. "Imperial uncle, what's wrong? It wasn't easy for us to travel thousands of miles to Ruyang. Why are we standing at the city gates and getting angry?" "Oh. Is this young Master Feng San?" Feng Zhiao was famous in the capital in the past, so Mo Jingyu naturally recognized him. Feng Zhiao smiled and cupped his hands. Feng San greets King Yu, Lord Su, and Lord Mo. Suzhou was the oldest. After a long journey, his aged face was filled with exhaustion and paleness. However, he still nodded at Feng Zhiao. Feng Zhiao looked at Suzhou and inwardly sighed. He opened the city gates and invited the group into the city. When he was young, he followed by Mo Xiaoyao's side and received much of Suzhou's teachings. When he thought about Su Zuidi, who was still locked up in the dungeon, he couldn't help but inwardly sigh. The prince and his majesty must be tired from the long journey. Please enter the city and rest for a while. Later, the prince and his majesty will hold a welcoming dinner for you. Prince De glanced at the surrounding officials and commoners who were staring at him with unkind expressions. He knew that if he continued to cause trouble here, he would be the only one who would be embarrassed. With a snort, he flung his sleeves and walked into the city. Mo Jingyu looked around and followed with a smile. In his heart, he sighed that Mo Xiaoyao had only been in Ruyang for half a year, yet he was able to make the commoners and officials in the city side with him wholeheartedly. The power and influence of Prince Ding's residence on the commoners was indeed unfathomable. Prince De's personality was that of a hot-tempered old man. After being angered by Feng Zhiao at the city gates, he naturally couldn't vent his anger on Mo Xiaoyao at the welcoming dinner tonight. After entering the city, he didn't bother with the inn that Feng Zhiao had arranged for him to stay in and headed straight for the governor's manor. In reality, he didn't understand that Mo Xiaoyao hadn't planned on sending anyone to welcome him. If Feng Zhiao hadn't brought anyone with him, and he arrived at the city gates with such a large entourage only to find no one there, it would have been even worse. When he arrived at the governor's manor, he was informed that the prince and his majesty had just moved to a new residence. From now on, the governor's manor would be the Ruyang governor's manor. Thus, in a fit of anger, Prince De brought his men to the Prince Ding mansion in the southeast of Ruyang City. This trip to the northwest had originally been led by Prince De. He couldn't rest and insisted on finding Mo Xiaoyao. The others naturally couldn't rest and could only follow along. Chapter 422. The Prince Ding mansion was located in the southeast of Ruyang City, on the main road of the city, Xuanwu Street. Naturally, it couldn't compare to the Chu capital's Prince Ding mansion in terms of size and grandeur, but after a few months of renovations, it was still quite large. After all, the Chu capital's prosperity had a bit more of the Northwest's simplicity and boldness, adding a bit of austere air. On the main door, there were 3 simple words, Ding Wang Fu. It was majestic and imposing. De Wang was so angry that his fingers trembled. Impudent. Too impudent. What does Mo Xiaoyao want to do? The people around him were silent. De Wang only wanted to vent his anger and didn't really want an answer. Mo Jingyu stood to the side as though it had nothing to do with him, leisurely admiring the scenery. Not long after, someone came out to invite them in. At the same time, De Wang's expression became even uglier. It was fine that Mo Xiaoyao didn't come out of the city to welcome them, but he didn't even come out of the mansion's entrance. The other 3 people behind him also had ugly expressions, but it wasn't because of their face. Rather, it was because Prince Ding's actions showed that he didn't plan on giving the imperial court any face. This way, it would be difficult for them to complete their task this time. Mo Jingyu directly cursed Mo Jingqi in his heart. He was originally an idle prince. Whoever became the emperor had nothing to do with him. Mo Jingqi himself had ruined the relationship with the Prince Ding mansion, and now he had to travel thousands of li to the northwest. If Mo Xiaoyao really had the intention to rebel, would they still be alive to return to the capital? Wei Lin led the group into the mansion with a wooden expression. His overly young face made him look like he wasn't a manager who could manage a mansion's affairs. Of course, in reality, he wasn't. It was just that he didn't hide as quickly as Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, so the prince made him a temporary manager. Looking sideways at Feng Zhiyao, who was leisurely following at the side, Wei Lin silently agreed with his opinion. The position of general manager sounded very prestigious, But it was really not suitable for young people like them in their prime. Hearing someone call him Steward Wei Lin felt a slight stomachache. In the hall, Mo Xiaoyao was sitting and talking to Yi Li. When he saw Wei Lin leading his men in, he did not hold back and said with a faint smile, "De Wang, King Yu, Lord Su, Lord Mo, please take a seat." Seeing Mo Xiaoyao's white hair casually tied up and the smile on his face, he looked much warmer than when he was in the capital, but he didn't give off the slightest sense of closeness. On the contrary, it was even more frightening. Previously, Mo Xiaoyao had kept it a secret, so even though Mo Jingqi had tried to plant many spies in Ruyang, no one in the Chu capital knew that Mo Xiaoyao's hair had turned white overnight. Now that he saw it all of a sudden, he was shocked. King De slanted his eyes and snorted coldly, "You've been away from the capital for a while. Have you forgotten your manners? It seems that the emperor was right when he said that you were arrogant." Mo Xiaoyao looked playfully at the furious King De in front of him. Manners? Did he want him to salute him? In King De's opinion, Mo Xiaoyao was just a commoner whose title had been taken away by the emperor. Logically speaking, he should be saluting him. But unfortunately, from the moment King De entered Ruyang City, he was destined to be stifled. Arrogant? Why does this prince remember that His Majesty was talking about treason and rebellion? Feng-san. Mo Xiaoyao's words carried a smile, but his eyes revealed traces of coldness. Feng Zhiao waved his fan and smiled, replying to Prince, "His Majesty's imperial edict did say so." "How dare you, Mo Xiaoyao? You!" King De flew into a rage after being reprimanded by the two of them. "Pa!" A crisp sound strangely drowned out King De's angry roar. Everyone looked towards the source of the sound. The white jade teacup in Mo Xiaoyao's hand instantly shattered. A few pieces of jade fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Mo Xiaoyao slowly opened his hand. The white powder fell from his palm and floated to the ground in front of him. King De's throat seemed to be blocked by something. He opened his mouth but couldn't say a single word. He only heard Mo Xiaoyao say with a smile, "King De, lower your voice. If you scare I's beloved concubine and heir, it will really make things difficult for I." King De's heart couldn't help but tremble when he met Mo Xiaoyao's cold eyes. He didn't know why, but he remembered the 7,000 soldiers that Mo Xiaoyao had killed. After staring blankly for a while, King De didn't dare to say anything. His face, which had been well maintained, kept changing between green and red. Mo Jingyu looked at everyone in the hall and said with a smile, "Imperial uncle has come a long way, so it's inevitable that he's a bit angry. I hope Prince Ding will forgive him." Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him and said with a faint smile, "So that's how it is. Then there's no need to worry. The weather is hot, so it's hard not to get angry. The Northwest isn't as prosperous as the capital. I will order people to prepare more food for King De to cool down his anger." Mo Jingyu's smile was a bit stiff, but he still had to say what he had to say. He could tell that if he let the bad-tempered imperial uncle say something, he might anger Mo Xiaoyao and the others. If that happened, none of them would be able to return alive. The Northwest is bitterly cold. It's cold in the winter and hot in the summer. It's very remote. Prince Ding has been away for a long time. Now that the Northwest has been pacified, why don't you return to the capital as soon as possible? That way, the princess consort and heir won't have to suffer here. Return to the capital? Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have heard something interesting. He raised his brows and looked at Mo Jingyu. After not seeing him for a long time, the idle Prince Mo Jingyu's ability to lie through his teeth had improved quite a bit. Mo Jingqi had already issued an edict to strip him of his title and reduce his military power. Furthermore, he had announced that he was planning to commit treason. Now, Mo Jingyu was actually telling him that it was time to return to the capital? Was there something wrong with Mo Jingyu's brain, or did he think that there was something wrong with his brain? There was nothing wrong with Mo Jingyu's brain. It was the people above him who had problems with their brains. Trying his best to maintain the smile on his face, Mo Jingyu cursed Mo Jingqi countless times in his heart. Not to mention that Mo Xiaoyao finally couldn't tolerate him anymore, not to mention that his own younger brother had rebelled against him. If this continued, he would also want to rebel. Glancing at Suja sitting across from him, Mo Jingyu hoped that Mo Xiaoyao would give this old man some face. After all, Suja could be considered Mo Xiaoyao's half-teacher. Furthermore, Mo Xiaoyao had always been respectful towards this old man. Suja looked at Mo Xiaoyao's head of white hair and sighed heavily in his heart. It could be said that these old men had seen with their own eyes how Mo Xiaoyao had gone from being a high-spirited and dazzling young man to where he was today. Mo Xiaoyao was once his proudest student, as well as his future grandson-in-law whom he had high hopes for. However, in these 10 years, he had watched him struggle to move forward step by step. He had been powerless. Whether this matter was Mo Xiaoyao's fault, Suja didn't know. The core of the Su family was already too far away. However, there was one thing that Suja was well aware of. Mo Xiaoyao definitely couldn't return to the capital now. Thus, when he sensed Mo Jingyu's gaze on him, Suja only lowered his eyes and calmly drank his tea, as though he didn't know anything. Suja refused to speak. Mo Jian's words carried little weight, so he naturally couldn't speak. Mo Jingyu was inwardly furious, but there was nothing he could do. The atmosphere in the hall was heavy. Yi Li's calm gaze swept over everyone. She softly said, "You've all come from afar, so you must be tired. Why don't you rest and freshen up first? If there's anything else, we can discuss it at night." Chapter 423. Mo Jingyu, who was caught between a rock and a hard place, naturally couldn't ask for anything better. He hurriedly smiled and said, "Princess Consort is right. It was this prince who was rude." Since Yi Li had spoken, Mo Xiaoyao naturally had nothing to say. He looked at Yi Li with concern and asked, "Are you tired? I'll send you back to rest." After speaking, he ignored the guests still sitting in the hall and supported Yi Li to stand up. He told Feng Jiao and Wei Lin to take care of the guests, then left with Yi Li. Seeing Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li disappear at the door, Prince De finally calmed down. He pointed at the door and gasped for breath. What kind of attitude is that?" Mo Jingyu smiled bitterly. He pressed down on Prince De and advised, "This is the first time Princess Ding is pregnant, and she just returned from a calamity. It's inevitable that Prince Ding is nervous. Imperial uncle, why get angry?" Prince De humphed. He picked up the teacup beside him and took a big gulp to suppress his anger. At the side, Feng Jiao raised his brows and smiled. "Princes, our prince originally lived in the governor's manor, so we arranged for him to stay in an inn. Now that the prince and princess consort have moved to a new manor, I asked the prince and the two sirs to rest in the manor." Prince De rolled his eyes at him. Of course, he couldn't stay in an inn. As the emperor's uncle and also an imperial envoy, if he was thrown to stay in an inn, wouldn't he be laughed at when he returned to the capital? Wei Lin expressionlessly glanced at the crowd. He turned and ordered people to arrange accommodations. At night, the entire Ruyang city was brightly lit. Unlike the welcoming banquet earlier, which only had a few people, the welcoming banquet was exceptionally grand. The welcoming banquet was held on the tower of Ruyang City's east gate. Looking down from the top, Xuanwu Street was filled with people. Both sides of the street were decorated with lanterns and colored banners. It was extraordinarily lively. The tower was also filled with toasts, singing and dancing. All the civil officials and military officers in or near Ruyang City, as well as the local famous people of Ruyang City, were present at tonight's banquet. Although Prince Ding had already been in Ruyang City for half a year, only a very small number of people in the city had actually seen Prince Ding. As for Princess Ding, it could be said that she had never shown her face outside. Therefore, when they saw Prince Ding, who was dressed in a white robe with silver dragons embroidered on the edges, and whose hair was as white as snow, holding the hand of a woman in green who was pregnant and had a graceful bearing and elegant appearance, everyone could not help but be stunned. The two figures, one white and one green, stood side by side. They looked extremely harmonious and natural, as if they were born to be like this. Mo Xiaoyao helped Yili up the stage and carefully helped her sit down. Many of the soldiers seated below had not seen Mo Xiaoyao for a long time. The soldiers who had followed Yili before were especially excited and shouted in unison, "This subordinate greets Prince Wang Fei." Receiving their call, the civil officials on the other side also stood and bowed. "This subordinate greets Prince Wang Fei." Congratulations to Prince Wang Fei for having a little heir. Even though he did not like the little thing that had come to stay in Li's stomach and refused to come out, Mo Xiaoyao was in a good mood right now. He waved his hand and said, "Everyone, rise." At the same time, the noise from the tower also affected the people playing below. The people who had been playing below the tower turned and knelt in the direction of the tower. Someone took the lead and shouted, "Congratulations to Prince Wang Fei for 1,000 years of good health. Congratulations to Wang Fei for a safe return." With someone taking the lead, the people behind them naturally shouted as well. For a moment, their voices seemed to penetrate the entire Ruyang city. Mo Xiaoyao picked up a cup of wine and stood up. He looked at the people below the city and raised his voice, "No need for formalities. Tonight, the officials and the people will enjoy together. Here's a toast to all of you." His voice, which was infused with internal energy, spread far and wide. The people below the city stood up and cheered in unison. The atmosphere became even more lively than before. On the city tower, everyone stood up and raised their wine cups. "Thank you, Prince Wang Fei." After drinking a cup, Mo Xiaoyao sat down and said, "Everyone, feel free. There's no need to be restrained." The song and dance started again. The city tower was filled with joy and harmony. Only De Wang and Yu Wang, who were sitting in front of the guests, had ugly expressions on their faces. The two of them had never thought that Mo Xiaoyao would be able to make all of the officials and people in Ruyang City love and submit to him so much in just half a year when the imperial court was doing its best to destroy Prince Ding's reputation. Although it was called a welcoming banquet, it was better to say that Mo Xiaoyao wanted to give them and the imperial court a resounding slap in the face. "What's wrong with De Wang? I see that De Wang's complexion is not good. Where did he neglect you?" Sitting on the main seat, Mo Xiaoyao supported Yili with one hand and held a wine cup with the other. He looked at De Wang, whose face had turned green. De Wang choked. It should be said that ever since he entered Ruyang City, where had he not been neglected? Even though tonight's welcoming banquet was lively and joyous, but anyone with eyes could see that the welcoming banquet was just in passing. The true celebration of Ding Wang Fei's return and the birth of the future Shizhi was the true celebration. De Wang coldly said, "I don't dare. How could I dare to blame Prince Ding for neglecting me?" Mo Xiaoyao acted as if he did not understand the meaning behind De Wang's words. He laughed loudly and said, "That's good. De Wang has worked hard. Why don't you drink to your heart's content tonight?" Seeing that De Wang's expression was about to change again, Mo Jingyu hurriedly pulled him back and said in a low voice, "Imperial uncle, if there's anything you want to say, let's talk about it later. Don't anger everyone." Then he laughed loudly and said, "Imperial uncle, Prince Ding is right. Uncle has worked hard on this journey. Nephew toasts Imperial uncle." Mo Xiaoyao glanced at the two people with different expressions. He smiled faintly and ignored them. He turned to the side and chatted with the generals and officials below. Mo Jingyu used all his strength to suppress De Wang, who was about to explode in anger. He bitterly said in a low voice, "Imperial uncle, calm down. Right now, we're under someone else's roof." De Wang was angry and disdainfully said, "So what? Could it be that he dares to kill I? That's hard to say." Mo Jingyu thought to himself. He said to De Wang in a low voice, "Imperial uncle, right now, the northwest is Prince Ding's territory. If something happens, no one can do anything to him. Do you still remember the matter with Princess Ding? Mo Xiaoyao killed those 7,000 soldiers without even blinking an eye. But what can His Majesty do to him? At most, he could issue a few imperial edicts, reprimanding Mo Xiaoyao for his cruelty and indiscriminate killing of the innocent. But what use is that? Would Mo Jingqi dare to send troops to suppress Mo Xiaoyao? A few imperial edicts might not even be as effective as paper in the northwest. De Wang was under Mo Jingqi's paranoid emperor for so many years. He was also highly regarded by the emperor. He definitely wasn't stupid. However, he was the oldest prince of the previous emperor's generation. Even the emperor had to call him imperial uncle. In all these years, he really hadn't met Mo Xiaoyao face to face. Subconsciously, he always felt that Mo Xiaoyao should respect him a little. Moreover, he was a person who was proud of his status and wanted to keep up appearances, so he was especially agitated when Mo Xiaoyao gave him the cold shoulder. Now that he heard Mo Jingyu's advice, he looked at the harmonious scene on the city gate tower. The civil and military officials of Ruyang City clearly obeyed Mo Xiaoyao's words. How could they, the emperor's imperial envoys, be in their eyes? A cool breeze blew from the city gate. De Wang's body trembled. His mind instantly cleared up, and he broke out in a cold sweat. Chapter 424. He had lived a peaceful life for more than 10 years. He had long forgotten about the tragic struggle for the throne when the previous emperor had yet to ascend to the throne. It was inevitable that he would become arrogant. At this moment, he suddenly came back to his senses and couldn't help but recall what he had done in the past few years. He even began to suspect that Mo Jingqi had sent him to the northwest because he didn't like him and wanted to borrow Mo Xiaoyao's hands to get rid of him. Mo Jingyu didn't know what he was thinking. He only saw that although his expression was ugly, he had calmed down. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and raise his wine cup to enjoy the song and dance. Yi Li, who was sitting above, naturally saw the interaction between the King and King Yu. She watched as the King drank his wine with a gloomy face. Although she didn't know what King Yu said, she could tell that he was trying to persuade the King. In his heart, he labeled King Yu as a scheming person. What is Li looking at? Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and looked at Yi Li with a smile. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "It's nothing. You did it on purpose today, didn't you?" If it wasn't for King Yu stopping him, the King would have already gotten angry. Mo Xiaoyao snorted and brought a cup of fresh fruit juice to her lips. He said indifferently, "The older the King gets, the less he knows how to be a person. If you don't dry him out first, he can raise his nose to the sky. I have never liked being looked down upon by others." Yi Li took a sip of the fruit juice in her wine cup. The slightly cold watermelon juice had a faint sweetness to it, which suited her appetite. Mo Xiaoyao said softly, "It's a little cold from the ice, but Mr. Shen said that it won't be a problem if you use it a little. Are you tired? If you're tired, let's go back first." Yi Li shook her head and said, "I'll go back by myself later." "Can you leave first?" Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and laughed, "Why would we need to stay here for this kind of banquet? I'm afraid they can't wait for us to leave so that they can enjoy themselves." When Yi Li heard this, she glanced at the people below. It was fine if it was just the civil officials, but even the military generals were sitting obediently, drinking wine and enjoying the entertainment. Yi Li had seen these military generals before, and they were never polite when drinking. Sure enough, it was because they were here that they were restrained. She helped Yi Li up. Everyone below the stage also stopped when they saw the prince and princess consort stand up. They all looked up respectfully. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and said, "If I and Wang Fei stay here, you won't be at ease. I will propose another toast to everyone, and then everyone can do as they please." Finishing, he raised the wine cup and proposed a toast to the people below, tilting his head back and draining the contents. Yi Li stood beside Mo Xiaoyao and similarly raised her wine cup. She smiled faintly and said, "This consort would also like to propose a toast to everyone. Please feel free to drink." Everyone gave their thanks in unison, especially the generals who had fought with Yi Li before. They were very excited. From far away, Yi Li could see Yunting's young and handsome face turn red as he loudly gave his thanks. Waving his hand for everyone to do as they please, Mo Xiaoyao supported Yi Li as they left the banquet. Leaving behind the people to continue drinking, it sounded even more lively. Coming down from the city gate tower, Mo Xiaoyao waved away the guards and servant girls. He supported Yili as they strolled down the street. The lights on both sides of the street were bright. The common people had all come out of their homes to play in groups. Zhang Yu, the newly appointed prefect, was very thorough in his work. Not only were there lanterns on the street for people to enjoy, there were also performances to attract people's gazes. If it wasn't for Mo Xiaoyao's head of white hair being too conspicuous, no one would have noticed the two of them walking amidst the happy crowd. Seeing the two of them, the common people were first shocked and then came forward to bow. Mo Xiaoyao hurriedly indicated for everyone not to make a fuss. He held Yili's hand and retreated to a place with fewer people. He helplessly lowered his head to look at the white hair in front of his chest and said, as expected, "It's too eye-catching. I can't even accompany you on the street." Yili smiled and said, "This also means that you are loved by the common people. The common people rarely see you, so they are naturally very curious. As time passes, they will naturally get used to it. If there were people bowing to them the moment they went out, then they wouldn't need to go out. When they were in the capital, there were high officials and nobles everywhere. If the common people bowed to them as soon as they saw them, there probably wouldn't be enough of them." Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yili and said with a smile, "Since we can't enjoy the Lantern Festival, let's slowly walk back. The Prince Ding mansion wasn't too far from here." The two of them held hands and walked slowly along the empty street. Tonight, most of the people in the city had gathered at the Lantern Festival, making the other streets seem especially deserted and quiet. Under the moonlight, the two of them walked side by side. Yili asked softly, "King De and King Yu, what are your plans?" Mo Xiaoyao smiled casually and said, "These two people won't be able to cause any waves. Let's see what they have to say tomorrow. Does Mo Jingqi think that everyone in the world is a fool? Now he has sent someone to persuade I to return to the capital. Heh. Could it be that Mo Jingqi didn't know that ever since he killed the 7,000 soldiers and occupied Ruyang, he would never be able to return? Right now, he was still able to maintain a delicate balance in the Northwest Imperial Court. Once he really returned, what awaited him and the Mahist army was countless impeachment reports and a dead end. Unfortunately, he didn't want to die at all right now. If Mo Jingqi was smart, he shouldn't have provoked him. Mo Jingqi's scheming was nothing in Mo Xiaoyao's eyes. If he thought that the Prince Ding mansion had protected the Dechu state for generations because of the reputation of being a martyr, then he was gravely mistaken. Then, what about Lord Su? Yili asked in a low voice. Mo Xiaoyao's respect for Su Zhe was definitely real. Heaven, earth, king, family, and master, the relationship between a teacher and a student was nothing else. Even when Mo Xiaoyao was betrayed by Su Zuodi under such circumstances, Yili wouldn't believe that it wasn't for Su Zhe's sake. Moreover, Su Zhe's only son and grandson had both died for the sake of the Prince Ding mansion. In Mo Xiaoyao's heart, Su Zhe was no less important than family. Mo Xiaoyao muttered to himself for a moment and then said in a low voice, "Elder Su no longer has anything to worry about in the capital. If he's willing to stay in the northwest, I will naturally take care of him until he grows old. If he still can't let go of the imperial court, then I'll send someone to secretly take care of him." Yili frowned and sighed softly, "You know that I'm not talking about this. Su Zuodi is Elder Su's only family. The reason why Mo Jingqi sent an old man in his 70s over thousands of miles away is probably because of this, right? In the past few days, half of the assassins who broke into the mansion were Mo Jingqi's people. It seems that Mo Jingqi is different from Tan Jiji. He doesn't seem to want Su Zuodi to die." Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashed with a trace of scarlet. He said lightly, "Su Zuodi must die. Elder Su won't plead for her." Su Zhe was an upright person and hated people who betrayed him the most. When Su Zuodi fled the capital, it was behind Su Zhe's back. But with Su Zhe's character, he would definitely not recognize Su Zuodi as his granddaughter. Yili held his hand and said softly, "Lord Su has taught you since you were young. I won't be soft-hearted toward Su Zuodi, But I also don't want to disappoint Elder Su because of this. Even if Elder Su and Su Zuidi cut off all ties, she is still his granddaughter and his only family in this world. It's not good to have a grudge in his heart. Then don't let Elder Su know. Mo Xiaoyao said lightly, in any case, it's been a stalemate for so long and there's still no progress on Qin Feng's side. Then there's no need to ask. She's not the only one who knows the so-called secret. Let Qin Feng finish her off. Chapter 425. Nonsense. Yili softly said, if Lord Su just came and she died, what do you want the old man to think? All right. She comfortingly hugged Mo Xiaoyao, brushed away the white hair by his ear and softly said, Lord Su is not only your benevolent teacher, he is also a clear stream in the court with countless students and followers. It is reasonable for us to give him some face. Mo Xiaoyao coldly said, are we just going to let her go like this? Reaching out his hand to tightly hold her in his embrace, Mo Xiaoyao closed his eyes to calm the killing intent in his heart. He really did not want these people to still be alive. Su Zuidi, Lei Jinting, Marquis Muyang and Mo Jingqi, as long as he saw them or even thought of them, the scene of Li Li falling off the cliff would appear in his mind. He even felt that everything was like a dream, and when he woke up from this dream, it would still be the time when he lost Li Li. Sensing the cold and lonely aura coming from Mo Xiaoyao's body, Yi Li raised her head and saw his blank expression with a trace of despair. Yi Li's heart ached and she hurriedly held his hand in front of her heart and softly said, all right, it's my fault. I thought too much. If you don't like it, I will let Qin Feng kill Su Zuidi. Mo Xiaoyao held the girl in front of him in his embrace and took a deep breath. Smelling the familiar and quiet fragrance, his originally gloomy mood suddenly became much better. He liked how Li Li complied with him. Gently rubbing Yi Li's hair, Mo Xiaoyao softly laughed and said, I know that Li is doing this for my own good. Su Zuidi's matter is not urgent. Of course he knew that Li Li said this for him. The Ding imperial household had originally made enemies everywhere, and now that they had fallen out with the court, it could be said that as long as one held power in this world, they would be their enemy. Under such circumstances, the more people who supported him, the easier it would be for the Mahist army. Ever since Mr. Qin Yun left the court, it could be said that Su Zhe was the leader of the Qin faction in the court. Although he did not have much real power, these people controlled the way of speech and public opinion. Once he and Su Zhe became enemies, he was afraid that most of the scholars in the world would not have a good impression of him. Yi Li's eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness, and she said softly, leave Su Zuidi and Elder Su to me. I won't let you see her again in the future. Yi Li discovered that she had misjudged Su Zuidi's influence on Mo Xiaoyao. It wasn't that she suspected that Mo Xiaoyao still had feelings for Su Zuidi, but Su Zuidi would obviously make Mo Xiaoyao think of some bad things, which would seriously affect his mood. Since that was the case, she could not allow Su Zuidi to continue living. No matter what the reason was. As for Su Zhe, if Elder Su was really like Mo Xiaoyao said, then perhaps there was a way to solve it. Prince, Princess. The two returned to the Prince Ding mansion and sat down. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han had obviously been waiting for a long time. Mo Xiaoyao turned to the two, still holding Yi Li's waist with one hand, and asked, how is the mansion? Zhuo Jing reported, Prince's prediction is like a god. The guards that Prince De brought, as well as the people that arrived in Ruyang in the past 2 days, have already besieged the governor's mansion. The other side had clearly chosen a good time. Tonight, the whole city was celebrating, and the east side of the city was even more lively. Even though the governor's mansion had caused such a big commotion, no one had noticed. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and laughed, oh? Besieging the governor's mansion? Lin Han said because Prince and Princess suddenly moved to a new mansion, the other side obviously did not notice. That's why they forced their way into the governor's mansion to rescue Su Zuidi. Because they did not make a big fuss when they moved, it was basically just the prince and princess moving in with their own belongings. Therefore, whether it was the guards who came with Prince De but were stopped outside the city, or the people who had been hiding in the city for a long time, none of them noticed, not to mention that Su Zuidi had been secretly moved to another place a day ago. Rescue? Not to silence her. Yili raised her eyebrows and asked. Zhua Jing said, this subordinate is certain that the other side did not intend to silence Su Zuidi. This time, the other side sent out extremely skilled martial artists. After breaking into the dungeon, they had at least 3 chances to kill the substitute in the dungeon. But the other side only wanted to bring her out and did not make a move. Interesting. Yili lowered her eyebrows and muttered to herself. Mo Jingqi's people wanted to save Su Zuidi, this did not make sense in any way. If Su Zuidi knew some secret that she should not know, Mo Jingqi should only want to silence her. The price of saving someone like this was a bit too high. Mo Xiaoyao held her hand and smiled. Li does not need to be so worried. The more he does, the more mistakes he makes. Sooner or later, we will know why. Did they leave anyone alive? Zhua Jing nodded and smiled, reporting to the prince, the harvest this time was quite big. The leader was actually the deputy commander of the Chu capital's imperial guards. There were also a few famous Jianghu experts who were all detained. Mo Xiaoyao nodded with satisfaction. After all these days of enduring those good-for-nothings causing trouble, he finally caught a few big fish. He ordered in a low voice, there is no need to interrogate them. Mo Jingqi will not tell them anything. Send the deputy commander's head back to the capital to Mo Jingqi. As for those Jianghu experts, you can ask them properly. The Jianghu people did not like to be restrained by the court. Even assassins were paid to kill and rarely listened to the court's orders. There must be a reason why Mo Jingqi could mobilize so many Jianghu experts at once. Yes. Speaking of the commander of the imperial guards and experts, where are Ling Qingyu and Mu Qingcang now? Yi Li asked. Mo Xiaoyao smiled. Ling Qingyu returned to the capital. Although this person is arrogant and not flexible, he is still human compared to those sly old foxes. For Ling Er's sake, I have to let him live. As for Mu Qingcang, he is in Ruyang. Does Li Li want to see him? Mu Qingcang was not just anyone. Not only was he Marquis Muyang's illegitimate son, but he was also one of the top 5 experts in the world. Mo Xiaoyao naturally would not put him in a place that he could not see. If someone took advantage of this loophole, it would be very troublesome. Yi Li thought for a moment and said, I do have something I want him to do, but Mu Qingcang is not easy to control. Let's wait a little longer. Mo Xiaoyao did not mind and nodded. Just as he was about to say something, the guard outside the door reported, Prince, Lord Suzhi requests an audience. Mo Xiaoyao was startled. Only then did he remember that Suzhi was old and could not bear the long journey. He was already exhausted, so he did not attend tonight's welcome banquet and was resting in the residence. He sat up and glanced at Yi Li before saying in a deep voice, quickly invite Elder Su in. Suzhi stepped into the study, and Mo Xiaoyao stood up to greet him to show his respect. Suzhi waved his hand and said, Prince, Princess Consort, this old man has disturbed you. After inviting Suzhi to sit down, Mo Xiaoyao sat down and said with a smile, Elder Su is so polite, but you are estranged from Xiaoyao. Suzhi looked at the young man and woman sitting side by side in front of him. His gaze lingered on Mo Xiaoyao's snow-like white hair for a while before he sighed and said, Prince does not cherish his body like this. How can the regent princess consort and your brother rest in peace? Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and looked down at the white hair hanging in front of his chest. He said with a smile, Xiaoyao knows he is wrong. Thank you for your concern, Elder Su. Suzhi shook his head and looked at Yi Li sitting to the side. He nodded and said with a smile, Princess Consort's safe return is due to the blessings of the ancestors of the Prince Ding mansion. Yi Li smiled faintly and said softly, Elder Su is right. Yi Li's safe return this time is due to the blessings of the ancestors. Yi Li understood that Suzhi was dissatisfied with her, but she did not feel angry. She could feel that Suzhi's dissatisfaction with her was not because of himself, but because of Mo Xiaoyao. He was blaming Mo Xiaoyao for having white hair overnight because of her. In the end, he was concerned about his student Imo Xiaoyao and did not have any selfish motives. Chapter 426. Imo Xiaoyao reached out to hold Yi Li's hand and smiled at Su Zhe. Elder Su is right. In 2 months, Miss Li will give birth. At that time, the Prince Ding mansion will have a successor. Xiaoyao still hopes that Elder Su will dote on the child. Hearing Imo Xiaoyao's words, Su Zhe's expression became even softer. He had lost his children and grandchildren in his old age. Even his only granddaughter was gone. In this life, he was destined to be alone. Hearing Imo Xiaoyao mention children, the love in his heart was uncontrollable. It was as if she could see a handsome and intelligent child like Imo Xiaoyao when he was young surrounding her and enjoying the beautiful scenery. How could she still care about Yi Li's expression? Su Zhe sighed softly and asked, "Your Highness has suffered a lot over the years. Us old men can't do much to help. These 2 years, it's all thanks to Wang Fei's care." The emperor was very wary of these old officials who had a relationship with Imo Lufang and the Prince Ding mansion. In these years, they could only watch in secret and couldn't do much. Looking at the white-haired man who had a thin figure but a sharp presence, Su Zhe's heart also dimmed. After so many years, Su Zhe could still clearly remember Imo Xiaoyao's appearance when he was young. The second young master of the Ding mansion, he was doted on by his father and protected by his older brother. At that time, the youth in embroidered clothes was bright and noble. He was like a bright flame flying across the capital, with a childish frivolity and pride. After a while, he led the army into battle and was invincible. Before he was 16, he was called the young war god. Every time he won, there would be countless noble young ladies who would break their heads just to see the young war god silhouette. He was the dream of many young ladies. At that time, how spirited and peerless was Imo Xiaoyao, making countless people only dare to look up to him and have no face to stand shoulder to shoulder with him. However, the present Imo Xiaoyao was only 26 or 27 years old, and his eyes no longer had the fire and elegance of the past. The flames that occasionally flashed in his indifferent eyes were ice cold. His handsome face coupled with his head of snow-white hair only made people feel a chill in their hearts. If the young Imo Xiaoyao was a peerless beauty that made people look up to him, then the current Imo Xiaoyao was more like the cold snow at the peak of a mountain that made people have no choice but to stop. That peerless youth, the Chu state's future god of war, had been destroyed in the end. Xiaoyao will never forget Elder Su's kindness in teaching me. Imo Xiaoyao smiled indifferently. Su Zhe shook his head, no longer thinking about the past, and said seriously, "Prince, do you know why the emperor sent Prince Yu and Prince De here?" Imo Xiaoyao was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. Although Prince Yu did not finish speaking, Xiaoyao understood. "Imo Jingqi wants me to return to the capital?" Su Zhe nodded. He looked at Imo Xiaoyao and said seriously, "You cannot go back." "Elder Su." Imo Xiaoyao was somewhat shocked. Su Zhe was an upright person and was loyal to the Dechu state. Although he understood that Su Zhe would not harm him, Imo Xiaoyao was still somewhat shocked to hear him stop him from returning to the capital. Su Zhe closed his eyes tiredly. After saying these words, he seemed to have aged a lot. Although he rarely stepped into the core of the court, Imo Jingqi's intentions were too obvious. He naturally understood the result that Imo Jingqi wanted by sending him here. Even if it was for the stability of the Dechu state, he also agreed that it was a good idea for Imo Xiaoyao to return to the capital. Because the current Imo Xiaoyao, no one could be sure if his heart was still with the Dechu state. But he also knew that once Imo Xiaoyao returned to the capital, what awaited him would not be the Ding King manner of the past, nor would he be imprisoned. He would directly lose his life. In private, Imo Xiaoyao was his student, a junior he had watched grow up. In public, the Dechu state was surrounded by powerful enemies. Imo Xiaoyao and the Mahist army were the only ones who could contend against them. Thus, he could only stop Imo Xiaoyao from returning to the capital. Su Zhe opened his eyes and looked at Imo Xiaoyao. Since Prince knows this, he must have already made a plan. That's what I meant, and it's also what Du Qua meant. Before leaving, Duke Hua wanted me to pass a message to Prince. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his brows, saying, Elder Su, please speak. The study was silent. Only Su Zhe's voice could be heard in the empty room. Elder Hua said that the Ding King Manor has been loyal to the Dechu state for generations and has never let down the royal family or the great ancestor. Right now, the Prince Ding Manor is only left with the prince's bloodline. Prince should make plans for the Prince Ding Manor and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the Mahist army. Duke Hua's manor has received the grace of 2 generations of emperors and should do their best for the Dechu state until their deaths. I only ask Prince, in the future, if the Dechu state is in trouble, I ask Prince to protect the people of the Dechu state from being massacred by the foreign races on account of the fact that we are of the same origin. Mo Xiaoyao was slightly shaken and raised his eyes to look at Su Zhe. Duke Hua's words had already determined that the Mahist army was bound to leave the Dechu state. As expected of an old general who had fought on the battlefield for a lifetime. Although Duke Hua was far away from the court, perhaps he was the one who could see the clearest. What plans does Duke Hua have? Mo Xiaoyao asked in a low voice. Su Zhe said lightly, the Dechu state is filled with the flames of war. On the day we left the capital, Duke Hua mentioned that he planned to send a memorial to the emperor to lead the troops out. I'm afraid that the memorial has already been placed on the emperor's table. Mo Xiaoyao furrowed his brows, saying, Duke Hua is already over 70 years old. The war situation has not reached the point where an elder needs to personally take action. Yili patted Mo Xiaoyao's hand, softly saying, the emperor will not allow Duke Hua to lead the troops out so easily. Mo Xiaoyao nodded slightly. Mo Jingqi was very wary of these old generals. Unless there was no other choice, he would not give military authority to Duke Hua. Su Zhe said, right now, the emperor is acting against the grain. He is no longer willing to listen to good officials' advice on governing the country. Instead, he is focused on scheming. Dechu state. With a long sigh, Su Zhe continued, Prince staying in the northwest was the right choice. Once he returns to the capital, I'm afraid that an inescapable net will be set up in the capital. If General Mo is destroyed, the Dechu state will perish. After speaking, Su Zhe stood up and said, this old man wants to say this much. Prince, Princess Consort, please take care. In 2 days, we will be returning to the capital. I don't know when we will meet again. Elder Su, the emperor must have sent you here to persuade Prince to return to the capital. If you act like this, how will you explain to the emperor when you return? Yili asked softly. Su Zhe turned to look at her, calmly saying with a smile, this old man is already 73 years old. It is rare to live for 70 years. What else do I have to explain? Yili frowned. Mo Jingqi was not a soft-hearted person. Once Su Zhe returned, even if Mo Jingqi did not sentence him to death, he might not be able to endure a casual punishment. Yili stood up. Mo Xiaoyao, who was sitting by her side, hurriedly and carefully helped her up to Su Zhe. Yili bowed slightly, saying, the northwest is far from the Chu capital. The journey is long and bumpy. Elder Su is already so old. Why don't you rest in the northwest for a few days and enjoy your later years? Su Zhe smiled as he looked at Yili, saying, many thanks for Princess Consort's concern. This old man was born in the Chu capital and grew up in the Chu capital. I have spent almost my entire life in the Chu capital. Having lived to this age, there is nothing I cannot let go of. I only hope that I can die at home and be buried in the Chu capital. Prince and Princess Consort have governed the Northwest very well. Unfortunately, it is not this old man's home. Chapter 427. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and helped Yili to sit back down. Then he turned to look at Su Zhe and asked, Elder Su, don't you want to ask about her? Su Zhe was stunned. His wrinkled face dimmed and the muscles on his face trembled uncontrollably. After a while, Su Zhe asked in a deep voice, is she still alive? Of course, he knew that Su Zuidi was still alive. Before leaving the capital, the emperor told him this news and said that he was willing to send people to rescue Su Zuidi. But Su Zhi understood even more clearly, why did Imo Xiaoyao catch Zuidi? His granddaughter, who had died of illness 9 years ago, was still alive. As long as he recalled the time of Su Zuidi's death and the situation at that time, what else did Su Zhi not understand? When Imo Xiaoyao was just injured, the Prince Ding mansion was in chaos and no one was in charge. It was all thanks to Great Elder Princess's support. He sent Zuidi to the Prince Ding mansion to take care of Imo Xiaoyao's injury. Although they were not married yet, there was no one in the Prince Ding mansion, so it was natural for Zuidi, who was his fiancée, to take care of him. But his granddaughter fell ill the next day and was sent back. At that time, he only thought that Zuidi had been spoiled since childhood and was frightened, but he did not expect. But even so, Xiaoyao had let Zuidi go back then and had no reason to catch her again. She must have done something to make Xiaoyao be so heartless. Imo Xiaoyao nodded and said in a deep voice, "She is in the Prince Ding mansion." The study fell into silence again. After a long time, Su Zhi asked, "What did she do?" Imo Xiaoyao hesitated for a moment, got up and took a file from the side table and handed it over. It recorded all the things that happened to Su Zuidi in the past 10 years. Su Zhi took it and opened the thick file with trembling fingers. He quickly flipped through it, and the more he read, the uglier his face became. Yili leaned against the couch and carefully observed Su Zhi's expression. She couldn't help but reveal a look of pity on her face. After a long time, Su Zhi raised his head from the file and said with a trembling voice, "Okay. What a good Su Zuidi. What a good Bai Long. Lady Bai of Xiling. Imperial Consort Qingrong, Genom of Gojoseon's spy. Good. You are truly my, Su Zhi's, granddaughter. Elder Su." Seeing Su Zhi's pale face, Yili frowned and said worriedly. At the same time, he waved his hand to signal Zhuo Jing, who had been watching from the outside, to invite Shenyang over. Su Zhi waved his hand and slumped back into his chair. He lowered his head and looked at the file in his trembling hands. Was there something wrong with his teaching? His granddaughter, who had always been obedient and docile in his eyes, had actually done so many things behind his back. At the age of 15, she had gotten acquainted with the orphan of the royal family of the previous dynasty. After her fiancé was seriously injured, she could even instigate Master Mingyu to help her fake her death to escape. In Xiling, she had even used the identity of the Bai family to become the imperial consort of Xiling. She had interacted with the Emperor of Xiling and Genom of Gojoseon. She had even reached the point where she could threaten the Emperor of Xiling. And, she had sent people to assassinate the unmarried Princess Ding. Was this his granddaughter? Su Zhi suddenly remembered that many years ago, the current emperor had secretly expressed his intention to bring Su Zuidi into the palace as a consort. At that time, he had flatly refused with the reason that Su Zuidi was already engaged. In fact, even if Su Zuidi and Imo Xiaoyao were not engaged at that time, he still wouldn't have agreed to let his granddaughter enter the palace. But who would have thought that she didn't become the imperial consort of Dechu state, but the imperial consort of Xiling? Finally, Su Zhi seemed to have calmed down. He stood up and said, "This old man is tired, so I won't disturb the prince's consort any longer. As for that evil creature..." Su Zhi closed his eyes tiredly, the corners of his mouth twitching slightly. "Let the prince's consort do as she pleases. The Su family doesn't have such a granddaughter." After he finished speaking, he didn't look at Imo Xiaoyao and Yili anymore and strode out the door. Yili hurriedly signaled for Lin Han to follow. As expected, they had only taken a few steps when they heard Lin Han's voice outside the door. "Lord Su! Lord Su!" Imo Xiaoyao rushed out the door and saw Su Zhi on the ground being supported by Lin Han. The dark pool of blood on the ground was a ghastly sight under the moonlight. Imo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes and said lightly, "Send Elder Su back." Behind him, Yili walked to his side and held his hand. The two watched as Su Zhi was sent back to the guest room by Lin Han. Looking at Imo Xiaoyao's indifferent expression, Yili said softly, "Why are you like this? Didn't you say that you would leave Su Zuidi's matter to me?" Mo Xiaoyao looked at her quietly. Yili leaned into his arms and said softly, I know that you don't want to make things difficult for me, but since I am the king's consort, isn't it my duty to deal with these matters? If something happens to Lord Su because of this, would you be able to let it go? Mo Xiaoyao was silent and only reached out to pull her into his arms. Even though she was more than 7 months pregnant, Yili still looked thin and slender. The two leaned against each other, the moonlight quietly falling on their bodies, making people's hearts feel exceptionally peaceful. Inside the Chu palace the window was half closed, the silver moonlight quietly falling into the garden outside the window, and the air was filled with a strange fragrance. At the corner of the wall outside the window, a white flower slowly bloomed with a beautiful charm. The snow-white flower bloomed like a lotus, but it was even more holy and noble than a lotus, like a white fairy dancing alone under the moonlight. In front of the window, a beautiful woman in white lazily leaned against the window, letting the moonlight fall on her body. Her indifferent eyes casually looked at the blooming epiphyllum outside the window, lost in thought. Pure as ice and pure as jade, only blooming in the middle of the night, not competing with other flowers. This epiphyllum is the most beautiful flower in the world, isn't it? A man's laughing voice sounded in the room, but there seemed to be a hint of ridicule in his laughter. The woman in white didn't even bother to turn her head and said indifferently, if there is no one who cherishes flowers, what is the use of being beautiful? The man smiled and said, how can that be? How many people have waited all night to see this epiphyllum bloom, but unfortunately, they can't see it. Epiphyllum bloom, only for Skanda, this really is a flower that makes people both love and hate it. The woman in white, noble consort Lu, sat up and looked coldly at the man in the hall. What are you doing here? Mo Jingqi has sent people everywhere to look for you, and you still dare to come to the palace? There were no candles in the hall. In the darkness, a man strolled out. The moonlight shone on his body, adding a strange aura. I came, naturally, to tell you my harvest from this trip to the capital. One good news, one bad news. Which one does noble consort Lu want to hear? Noble consort Lu looked at him indifferently, as if unmoved. The man smiled helplessly and said, news about Mo Xiaoyao, are you also not interested? Noble consort Lu's cold eyes moved slightly, and she stared at the man who was deliberately mystifying her. The man said with some frustration, fine, the good news is that your enemy, Su Zuidi, is now in Prince Ding's hands. And she has been tortured until she is half dead. It seems that Prince Ding has really cut off all ties with her. The bad news is, Princess Ding returned to Riyang City alive, and she is 7 months pregnant. In 2 months, the heir of the Prince Ding mansion will be born. Yili is still alive? Noble consort Lu said coldly, you have seen Yili. The man nodded and said, she fell into my hands. Originally, I wanted to use her to threaten Mo Xiaoyao, but... Chapter 428. Whiz! A hidden weapon pierced through the air, and the man dodged to the side. Noble consort Lu, who was in front of the window, had already stood up and stared at him angrily. Tan Jiji. You've seen Yili before, why didn't you just kill her? The man was Tan Jiji, who had disappeared after leaving the northwest. Tan Jiji helplessly said, if I really killed Yili, do you think I would still be able to come back alive? Noble consort Lu looked at him with disgust and said, don't forget our deal, I only want Yili to die. It seems that you have forgotten. Tan Jiji looked at the beautiful woman who was as cold as ice in front of him, and a strange light flashed through his eyes. How could I dare to forget noble consort's wish? But you can't ask me to exchange my life for Yili's life, right? Don't worry, as long as our matter is done, not to mention Yili, Mo Xiaoyao can also be handed over to you to deal with. Noble consort Lu coldly said, that's your business, don't involve me in your trivial matters. Tan Jiji spread out his hands, well, it's my business. What did His Majesty do after I left the capital? Noble consort Lu coldly said, he was already stupid, but now he's even more stupid. Tan Jiji smiled gloomily, he's stupid, I heard that he sent De Wang and Yu Wang to the northwest to let Mo Xiaoyao return to the capital. Which idiot came up with this idea? Does he think that Mo Xiaoyao is as brainless as him? Noble consort Lu indifferently said, so what if Mo Xiaoyao doesn't come back? I'm afraid that De Wang and Yu Wang won't be able to come back. Tan Jiji lowered his head and thought for a moment, then smiled and said, so it was noble consort's idea. Announcing Mo Xiaoyao's return to the capital was a lie, and using this to get rid of De Wang and Yu Wang was the real deal? However, I'm afraid that noble consort will be disappointed. Mo Xiaoyao may not kill those two princes. Noble consort Lu looked at Tan Jiji coldly. Tan Jiji continued, however, since noble consort Lu doesn't like them, I will do everything for you. It has nothing to do with me. Noble consort Lu turned around and continued to admire the epiphyllum in front of her. Nothing to do with me. Tan Jiji looked at the woman who was as beautiful as a fairy in front of him with great interest. Since the first time he saw noble consort Lu, he felt this woman was very interesting. She had no ambition and did not care about the emperor's favor at all. In this deep palace, she was like a snow lotus blooming alone at the peak of a mountain, coldly looking down at the people in the palace. At that time, he thought that this was just a way for her to gain favor. After all, the emperor was used to countless women fawning over him. A beauty with a cold personality was especially attractive. But he soon realized that she really didn't care about these things. If the emperor came, she would wait indifferently. If the emperor didn't come, she didn't care either. If she continued to be like this, he would have to admire this woman. But in the end, he found her weakness, Prince Ding and Mo Xiaoyao. Noble consort Lu really loved Mo Xiaoyao. And unlike Su Zuidi, who loved him for some complicated reasons, she simply loved Mo Xiaoyao. She didn't even care if Mo Xiaoyao was the second son of the Prince Ding mansion, the Prince of Dinghua, or an ordinary commoner. She also didn't care if Mo Xiaoyao was fighting on the battlefield or lying in bed with disabled legs. Tan Jiji felt that he was about to be moved by her infatuation. Unfortunately, Mo Xiaoyao never had her in his eyes. If the world's #1 beauty, Su Zuidi, who was Mo Xiaoyao's childhood sweetheart, couldn't capture Mo Xiaoyao's heart, then what hope could a daughter of the Lu family, whom Mo Xiaoyao didn't like very much, have? Even if noble consort Lu wasn't inferior to Su Zuidi. Originally, noble consort Lu didn't care, because if she couldn't have Mo Xiaoyao, no one else could either. She could even lie to herself that it wasn't that Mo Xiaoyao didn't love her, but that he didn't know how to love at all. But now, Mo Xiaoyao was deeply in love with his wife in the northwest, and it wouldn't be long before their child was born. He didn't believe that noble consort Lu could still hold herself back. Seeing that noble consort Lu wasn't moved, Tan Jiji sighed and said slowly, "Noble consort Lu, are you really willing to spend the rest of your life in the palace? In 2 months, Prince Ding's son will be born, haha. Prince Ding will definitely be more devoted to Princess Ding. At that time, I'm afraid that no one in the world will be able to enter Prince Ding's eyes. I heard that, back then, Prince Ding was promised to the Su family. In this life, he will only have Princess Ding." Noble consort Lu suddenly turned her head and shot a cold gaze at the man under the moonlight. The Su family. The Su family and Shou Prince Ding have something to do with each other? Noble consort Lu, don't tell me you also believe that the Su family is aloof from worldly affairs and won't help either side? Tan Jiji smiled. Don't forget. Ever since Prince Ding occupied Ruyang, even Ling Qingyu and Mu Yang were released, but there has been no news of the Su family's second son, Su Qingze. Since Mo Xiaoyao even let Ling Qingyu and Mu Yang go, he wouldn't detain his wife's uncle, right? Naturally, it's Su Qingze who refuses to come back. Noble consort Lu said lightly, even so, so what? Su Hongyan is in the capital, and Mr. Qingyun and Su Hongyu are in Yunzhou. As long as these 3 don't make a move, what can the Su family do even if the 5 young masters come to Ruyang? His Majesty won't easily touch the Su family. Tan Jiji chuckled in a low voice. Noble consort Lu, why don't you tell His Majesty about the Su family's deeds when the Dechu state was founded? His Majesty may understand that even with Su Hongyan and Su Qingyun in his hands, he may not be safe. Noble Consort Lu looked at him strangely and said, "Why don't you tell him yourself? He has been sending people everywhere to look for you these days, thinking that you were secretly harmed by Prince Ding." Tan Jiji shrugged helplessly and gritted his teeth. "That bitch Su Zuidi told Mo Xiaoyao my identity. Once I appear in the palace again, it's hard to guarantee that Mo Xiaoyao won't disclose this matter to His Majesty." Noble Consort Lu sneered. "So young Master Tan still has dealings with Su Zuidi. Does the title of the world's most beautiful woman live up to its name?" Tan Jiji said, "Of course not as beautiful as Noble Consort Lu. Who knows how badly that bitch Su Zuidi has been tortured by Mo Xiaoyao. It's a pity that my people haven't found a chance to kill her." When Su Zuidi was mentioned, Tan Jiji felt hatred in his heart. When he was young and frivolous, he always thought that Mo Xiaoyao's fiancée was more beautiful than other women. Now it seemed that a beauty like Noble Consort Lu was the real beauty. If there was medicine for regret in this world, he would never have provoked that woman Su Zuidi back then. Looking at Noble Consort Lu's icy face, Tan Jiji softened his voice and said, "Noble Consort Lu, you should think about it carefully. Apart from the Su family, it's not that Noble Consort Lu doesn't have any benefits, right? As long as you get rid of the Su family, it's like cutting off one of Princess Ding's arms." Seeing Noble Consort Lu remain silent, Tan Jiji understood that she was a little moved. He continued, "The treasures of the previous dynasty are in the northwest, including the imperial jade seal, the great ancestors' art of war and wealth. Now it's probably all owned by Mo Xiaoyao. Noble Consort Lu, you can disclose this information to His Majesty, which can be considered as fulfilling our relationship as monarch and minister." Noble Consort Lu sneered. "Even Mo Jingqi himself doesn't know about it. How can I explain how I know about it?" Tan Jiji raised his eyebrows and smiled. He said, "If that's the case, I won't force you. I'll ask Lord Lu to do it. I shouldn't have troubled Noble Consort Lu in the first place." Chapter 429. "You can go now," Noble Consort Lu said. Tan Jiji sighed, "Noble Consort Lu, you are really heartless. You and I have known each other for many years. The Emperor is here." The eunuch's sharp voice came from outside the palace gate. Tan Jiji's eyes flashed, "It's so late, why is the Emperor here?" Noble Consort Lu stood up and said lightly, "He is the Emperor, who can stop him when he wants to come?" Tan Jiji sighed helplessly, "That's why everyone in the world wants to be the Emperor. Please take care of yourself, Noble Consort Lu, I'll leave first." Seeing Tan Jiji disappear into the darkness, Noble Consort Lu lowered her head and stayed silent for a while, then said lightly, "Not everyone is interested in that position. If that person was really interested in that position, she would do anything for him, even if she had to give him everything. She just wanted him to look at her seriously." She tidied up her clothes slowly. Mo Jingqi's carriage had already arrived outside the palace. Stepping into the palace, Missouri Jingqi looked at the dark room and frowned, "Why don't you light the lamps? Where are all the servants?" Just by hearing Mo Jingqi's tone, Noble Consort Lu knew that he was in a bad mood right now. It was said that Noble Consort Lu was the most favored in the palace, and the emperor often went against the Empress Dowager for her. But only Noble Consort Lu knew that it was just because Mo Jingqi was in a good mood. When Mo Jingqi was in a good mood, he was naturally favored, but when he was in a bad mood, it was the people closest to him who suffered. Therefore, Noble Consort Lu never looked down on the empress who was neglected. Mo Jingqi didn't favor her, but gave her the power to lead the harem. And he never lost his temper with her. Therefore, the empress was the most comfortable person in the palace, even if the reason was that Mo Jingqi didn't want to get close to the empress because he was guarding against the Hua family. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, I asked them to leave," Noble Consort Lu said lightly. The maids and eunuchs who followed Mo Jingqi quietly entered the palace, lit all the candles, and then left silently. The hall was bright under the candlelight, and there was a faint fragrance in the air. Mo Jingqi looked at Noble Consort Lu and said, "It's so late. Why haven't you gone to bed yet?" Noble consort Lu said calmly, damn the epiphyllum outside the window. I was too greedy and forgot the time. Oh? Mo Jingqi raised his eyebrows and walked to the half-open window. Sure enough, he saw a blooming epiphyllum under the window. Only then did he say with a smile, so I've disturbed my beloved concubine's mood of admiring the flowers? Noble consort Lu remained silent, tacitly agreeing. Mo Jingqi was already used to her personality, so he didn't mind. If noble consort Lu was too warm and friendly to him, he would be suspicious. Looking at the exceptionally beautiful woman under the moonlight, Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed with a trace of lust. He pulled her over and kissed her fiercely against the window. The fierce entanglement of their tongues didn't end until noble consort Lu was out of breath. Mo Jingqi lowered his head to look at the woman in his arms. His eyes were still cold and indifferent, as if everything that had happened just now was just an illusion. Staring at noble consort Lu's beautiful face, Mo Jingqi's expression was complicated and hard to distinguish. There was anger and unwillingness, as well as deep infatuation and jealousy. Instead, it made the original desire completely fade away. It's so late. What's the matter, Your Majesty? Noble consort Lu pushed Mo Jingqi away gently, walked back to the couch in the hall, sat down, and asked. Mo Jingqi's face darkened. He walked to noble consort Lu's side and sat down. He gritted his teeth and said, Hua Chenfeng, that old bastard, sent a memorial today saying that he's going to lead an army to battle. Noble consort Lu looked up at him in confusion. Mo Jingqi snorted and said, he's dreaming. He's already so old, so he should stay at home and wait for death. For the sake of the Empress and Chang'e, I'll let him die of old age. Mo Xiaoyao just got into trouble, and he wants military power. I'll make him die a horrible death sooner or later. Noble consort Lu calmly listened to Mo Jingqi's scolding Duke Hua and the officials in the court who protected the Prince Ding mansion. She wouldn't speak ill of Duke Hua, and Mo Jingqi didn't need her to scold Duke Hua with him. He just needed someone to listen to him. When Mo Jingqi finally finished scolding, he turned around and saw noble consort Lu sitting on the side in a daze. He said unhappily, What are you thinking about? Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes and said, Your Majesty is in a bad mood today. Is it because of Duke Hua? Mo Jingqi snorted and said, I don't have time to deal with that old bastard Hua Chenfeng right now. Tan Jiji still hasn't come back. I'm afraid that Mo Xiaoyao secretly killed him. Those good-for-nothings came back and said that many people saw Tan Jiji leave Ruyang with their own eyes. Mo Xiaoyao has improved. Do you think you can fool me with this kind of trick? In the past, if Mo Xiaoyao didn't want to let Tan Jiji go, he would definitely not let him go. If he wanted to kill Tan Jiji, he would definitely stab him in the open. It would be useless to say anything. Now, he let him go on the surface, but secretly stabbed him. After so many years, Mo Xiaoyao had indeed improved a lot. Noble consort Lu lowered her eyes and hid the expression in her eyes, Your Majesty sent official Tan to the northwest. Naturally, you would think that he might fall into Prince Ding's hands. Mo Jingqi cursed in a low voice and said angrily, Tan Jiji is also useless. Not only was he captured by Mo Xiaoyao, even the Princess Ding was rescued by Mo Xiaoyao. Speaking of this, Mo Jingqi was so angry that his liver hurt. If Yili was captured, and she was even pregnant, Yili wouldn't Mo Xiaoyao obediently listen to him? Such a good opportunity was lost in vain. How could Mo Jingqi not be angry? Noble consort Lu raised her eyes and said, Official Tan has always been Your Majesty's trusted aide. Why did Your Majesty send Official Tan to the northwest? This concubine has overstepped. I shouldn't have asked about the matters of the imperial court. Mo Jingqi waved his hand and said, It's nothing. I naturally believe you. It's said that the previous dynasty's founder's imperial tomb and treasure are in the northwest. Tan Jiji went there for this. I just didn't expect. Noble consort Lu pondered for a moment and said, Then, now the previous dynasty's treasure is all in the Mahist army's possession. Mo Jingqi's face was full of anger. He stood up and said, That's right. If the previous dynasty's founder's legacy and treasure are really in the northwest, the Mahist army's strength will definitely reach a higher level. Damn that Tan Jiji. As if she didn't see Mo Jingqi's anger, noble consort Lu continued, and, I'm afraid it's not just the legacy and treasure. There's also, the Imperial Jade Seal. Mo Jingqi's face changed. He quickly looked at noble consort Lu and asked suspiciously, how do you know that there's the Imperial Jade Seal in the Emperor's tomb? Noble consort Lu's expression changed slightly. She raised her head and looked at him and said, it's also recorded in the history books that the previous dynasty's founder did get the Imperial Jade Seal. The Imperial Edict with the Imperial Jade Seal was also found among the relics left in the previous dynasty's palace. But after the previous dynasty's founder died, no one in the world has seen the Imperial Jade Seal. It's obvious that the founder didn't pass it down to his descendants. Since that's the case, the Imperial Jade Seal is very likely to be in the Imperial tomb. It can't be that the previous dynasty's founder just threw the Imperial Jade Seal into a random river, right? Mo Jingqi looked at noble consort Lu carefully. After a while, he said, my dear consort, you rarely talk so much. It seems, you really hate Mo Xiaoyao and Yi Li to the core. Noble consort Lu didn't hide it at all. Does the emperor not hate them? Mo Jingqi nodded and said, my dear consort is right. I hate them too. Noble consort Lu hated Mo Xiaoyao for not loving her. She hated Yi Li for taking away her love. She hated the king's family's strength and reputation. She hated Mo Xiaoyao's identity and talent even more. He was the late emperor's son. Mo Xiaoyao was only the second son of the king's family. But when he was young and carefully struggled in the palace, Missouri Xiaoyao was the person that everyone in the Chu capital, including the princes, wanted to befriend and curry favor with. The brothers schemed against each other and fought to the death for their father's favor. Even their own blood brother from the same mother had to be on guard against him. Mo Xiaoyao was willfully unrestrained. No matter what kind of trouble he caused, his elder brother, Mo Xiaowen, would helplessly follow behind and clean up for him. When he didn't sleep at all and worked hard to write a policy article to win a smile from his father, Mo Xiaoyao only needed to casually wave his brush and write a chapter to win the praise of the entire court. He was also a prince, but even the girl he liked was infatuated with Mo Xiaoyao. When he was still a prince, he had already sworn that one day, he would trample Mo Xiaoyao and the Prince Ding mansion under his feet. You're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.